Got it. Hey, what number is this, by the way?
32.
32. Okay, Project Herpetoculture, episode 32, which, by the way, is completely mind-blowing that we've gotten to 32 episodes of this show. That's weird.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't expect us to get to this point, but I just have to say the fact that we've done this will be the 32nd installment of this particular goal is remarkable. Okay, number 32. Before I pass this over to Roy to introduce our guest, I just want to go through and mention some of the stuff the housekeeping stuff that we want to do each show. So we have a Patreon now, patreon.com/Project Herpetoculture. And we have a small number of really wonderful and generous patrons over there that are really helping us out and making what we do more feasible. We have pretty big aspirations for the show. I know that this is going to be on the little recording that Charlie does too, but I just want to re-emphasize this, especially for the YouTube, because we don't put that on the YouTube. We have a list of also very generous and interesting sponsors, which is Charlie's cue. Also, Charlie's the man. Thank you, Charlie, for being a wonderful person and doing all the work that you do for us. You're great. That's why we pay you the big bucks.
Very
And then,
appreciated.
and then also we got to shout out Dylan at the Animals at Home Network and podcast, The Goat, as we mentioned before we hit the record button. Dylan, you're the dude. Keep doing what you're doing, and thanks for hosting our fledgling conversational recorded media. And with all of that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to. Oh, I'm Phil. My co-host is the sexy and charismatic, soothing Roy Arthur Blodgett, who's
Thank you, Phil.
who's
That
going to
was
introduce
that
it.
was a beautiful introduction.
Who's the
I
best
really
one
like that
yet?
last part in particular.
You know what we should do? Really quick. I'm sorry. You know what we should do? We should make it a thing now to try to make our intros as weird as possible for the just from you know what I mean? Just try to change them up every time. Like one, I should do
I wonder.
entirely in a different accent, like a country. You know what I mean? Like well, boy, I'll tell you, Project Herpetoculture is brought to you by propane, or some crap.
Oh, that was a
If you're
really good Hank Hill right there.
have
I
a very good
recognize
Hank
that
Hill.
voice.
I
I'm
I
sure
know.
Chris does as well. So thank you again for that introduction. I think that if we did that every time, there would be some issues with engagement because people only listen to the first little bit, and if it doesn't hook them in, then they just
Bullshit.
drops off.
Get out of here. Get out of here,
But
Roy. Bullshit, man.
um, a couple housekeeping notes that I want to add real quick before I introduce our esteemed guest. Um, one is that we now have a website. Um,
Oh,
by the
you're
time this
right.
episode will come out, the website will have already been up for a little while, but it's at
Oh,
projectherp.com. And we've got, just standard stuff on there about what we're doing, what we're about. But we also have a merch shop. We've got some cool shirts, including a really awesome one with some artwork by Phil of some grappling varanids. That
hell
one's my
yeah.
favorite. And we also have a mailing list there, which I would encourage folks to sign up for. We're not going to like spam you with a bunch of stuff, but we do have some ambitions and hopes and some beginnings of machinations or machinations. I'm not sure how to use that
Machinations.
word. Machinations. There we go. Of some events coming up, and that's how we want to kind of get the word out there. It'll really help. So check it out. And the last thing is for anyone interested in monkey lizards, the Plecris that I'm always talking about on here, I just dropped a new article, like kind of a first draft of an article I've done on the care and propagation of that species, and it's in the latest issue of the Responsible Herpetoculture Journal,
Nice.
which is an awesome online publication. So check that out. Support those guys if you can. And yeah, with all that out of the way, I'm happy to introduce our guests who I've actually met in person a couple times, unlike Phil. and that is
Whoa.
Chris Sharp of Sharpshooter Reptiles. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks for bearing with us through that little rocky intro. That was fun.
Oh no, that was a lot of fun. That Hank Hill was pretty impressive. I'll give him that for sure.
Oh, give me time. No, in it when it's not through the tinny sound of the computer, like if you're right here next to me, admittedly, I hate to be that guy. I have a very good Hank Hill impression. It's very good.
How's your boomhauer though?
It's all right. The boom, dang on, Bobby. It's not as good as Hank. It's not as good as Hank.
There you go. There you
Because
go.
with Hank, it's like, they say old Buck Strickland started out with nothing but a $1 bill. We're like, I'm a
it's quality, man.
Wow, that's solid.
massive King of the Hill fan. I love that show. I have way too much of it memorized. So we
It's a
should,
classic.
yeah. It's gonna take us a weird direction if we don't move on.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well,
so yeah, you go,
Go-
Roy. You do it.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna invite Chris to share a little bit about how he got started in herpetoculture and kind of what niche he fills in the space at this point. I know you're working with some pretty cool projects over there, but let's let the listeners hear it.
Well, I think I'll start with the second half of your question. The niche I fill, which isn't one that I put myself in. So we'll go to a tangent immediately. I was asked to speak at an Audubon Society a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and down in Bakersfield, California. And I showed up, and it was, I kind of knew it was going to be a bunch of old people, and there was some young folks that showed up, probably in their early 20s. So I went over. I'm like, oh, it's so cool to see some young people here, and they're like, yeah, it's good to have you here to bridge the gap. And it's like, I'm not that old, but my now wife thought that was the funniest thing. She laughed. She still laughs about that. So I guess that's, apart from the species I work with, maybe I fill and that niche of, I know a lot of the old school guys. I've been keeping reptiles now for, man, 25 plus years.
Wow.
But little stuff. My first lizard was a little side blotch that a neighbor caught for me. So
Mhm.
but yeah, I think when I was 10 or 11, I got my first lizard. But it started way before that. So I'm the oldest of four boys. So it was a pretty hectic household, living in a 2 bedroom
yeah.
apartment. But it was awesome. I wouldn't trade it. It was before video games were really prevalent. So we spent most of our summers riding bikes and swimming and all kinds of fun stuff like that, and camping. Very modest upbringing, so we didn't do a lot of big vacations, but we could go camping, which is always a lot of fun. And went to the zoo a lot, and probably even more than that, we went to pet stores because that was like a free zoo.
Yeah.
And my grandmother obviously knew that I was really big into the animal stuff. And I don't even know if they still make this publication, but there was a publication called Zoo Books.
Oh yeah, dude.
And
Hell yeah.
so yeah,
I love those.
I had the Birds of Prey issue, I had the Crocodilian issue. I mean, and those are the two that stand out to me the most. There's a bunch of other ones, but those two in particular, those things were so thrashed, just because I couldn't put them down.
Same.
And of course, like everyone says, dinosaurs are a big thing. And I was a weird kid. I mean, I'm still pretty weird. But I mean, I compare myself to others and I feel really normal. But to a kindergarten or first grader, I was a weird kid. I mean, I was social, but I also had a lot of weird interests. I'd sit and play with bugs at recess, and
Mhm.
my parents didn't raise me to use not appropriate names for things. So, I wasn't the kid in class like, oh, the dangly ball in my throat. It was, oh, my uvula. It wasn't
Yeah.
bugs, it was insects.
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
little kids, oh, he said sex,
Yeah.
like I didn't say no, it's insects, you dummy. And anyway, so that's that kind of stuff. When I was in kindergarten, a teacher showed us a picture of alligators. I'm probably misremembering. It was alligators or crocodiles, one or the other. Whatever it was, she called it the opposite. And I was like,
Uh,
hold
Mhm.
up,
you got
you got it backwards. I'm like 6 years old or whatever, and in front of the whole class, it's rude to interrupt adults, and you shouldn't tell them that they're wrong. And I don't remember the story. This has all been recanted to me by my parents. Apparently, I was very adamant that I was right and she was wrong. So she ran into my parents at a parent-teacher thing. She's like, I looked it up and he was right, but never told me, because of course she couldn't be right. For a teacher, they don't like that very much. So, and it's kind of blossomed from them. My parents were very supportive. I wasn't allowed to have two things, and that was roaches and venomous, which the roaches didn't last long. I mean, I think as soon as I could buy some Madagascar hissing roaches, I had them, and I just didn't tell my mom,
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then,
these are beetles. They're not cockroaches.
oh, I mean, the same thing too. And this was,
Yeah.
I look back at some of the things I did, and it's like, why that was so stupid. Someone gave me a rattlesnake when I was 14, and I shouldn't have had a rattlesnake at 14. I didn't know what I was doing. It was stupid. And my mom saw, what's that? Oh, it's a gopher snake, because it was a baby rattlesnake. They look similar. I got rid of that pretty quick. That was kind of a dumb thing, but yeah. So I mean, it's pretty much the same line of thought that everybody goes through. As much as I love reptiles, I think it's just I am all about nature and animals and everything. And as I've gotten older, seeing how it all connects and how it's all, you can't have one without the other kind of situation. So
Sure.
I don't know. We could just keep rambling, but I'm sure there's more questions. So
Yeah.
No, that's good stuff. That's really good start, man. We're always fun. It's always fun to hear the way people get started in this whole thing, because like on the one hand, there's a lot of through lines where, oh, dinosaurs, oh, catching stuff when I was a little kid, oh, realizing that I had this intrigue into biology that other people didn't have, even though that's the case, it's also cool to hear sort of some of the various differences between all of us too, and the ways it was presented to us and the ways it interested us. I feel like I remember having that same distinction in my head. I never said I played with bugs. I played with insects, and I remember having ant farms. And then when my mom got me my first ant farm, I remember being like, wait a minute, where's the queen? This is bullshit. This is bullshit. This isn't a real ant farm. This is going to die. What the hell? And I was
right.
like, I was offended that this ant farm company would give me something that wasn't sustainable,
That's the same thing with like sea monkeys. You hear, oh, sea
Yeah.
monkeys.
Oh, yeah.
You get so excited, and you look like, that's not a monkey. What the heck is this thing? It's still exciting, but I was really upset about the bait and switch. It's like, just call them brine shrimp then.
Yeah,
Some
exactly.
false advertising.
Why does it
goddamn.
matter? They're still cool.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. So
False
true.
advertising indeed. Yes. So I'm curious about, like, when did herpetoculture go from something that you maybe just thought was like this fun, interesting thing on the side to when it became something that was more of like, if there was a moment for this, was there a moment when it became something more professional for you, or more like
Involved.
yeah, more like involved in a particular way?
Sure. So, I grew up in the Steve Irwin era,
Fuck yeah.
which is amazing. Um, say what you will about the guy, he's, there's a huge number of people now that know about animals that never would have known, never would have cared if it weren't for that guy. He kind of put down foundation for a lot of stuff. So,
Yeah.
in my brain as a kid, and I have stuff, again, back from when I was a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And people are, oh, firefighter, policeman. And for me, it was always a zookeeper.
Yeah.
And it was like, what do you want to be? Draw pictures. So I, have old pictures that I've drawn, really crude crayon drawings, me, holding a snake and an alligator and a parrot, and I'm in some kind of zookeeper outfit. So that was always my goal, as a kid, was to be a zookeeper. And as I got older, that still was a goal, as I'm getting into my teens. But then I'm seeing people that are not only keeping snakes, but breeding them, which is great, but not just breeding them. That's what they do. That's their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And thinking, well, shoot, I could probably do that too. And having no background with any kind of business stuff, and obviously, the first step is to actually breed something. So
Yeah.
I think I started my first snakes I bred as I was 17, African house snakes. Which
Nice.
if you can't breed those, it's probably because you don't have a pair, because
Yeah.
they are the easiest things to breed. Um, oh, was that yours? Your first snakes breeding too?
No, I had African house snakes and I never bred them.
Oh, why not? They're super easy, man.
Dude, snakes are like my Achilles heel. I am highly focused and specific with lizards and desert lizards in particular. You give me anything
Fair.
non-desert lizard, and it's like I have these tortoises now, and I'm just barely getting them to function. You know what I
Right,
mean?
Yeah.
Like, and
right.
I'm just like, I did it. They're eating their food every day. I did it. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Yeah.
whereas like somehow with lizards, I don't know. Anyway, sorry, I derailed you.
No. That's great, man. That's actually really funny. I think everyone that I know that's kept them has bred them. So I think you're the outlier, but not everybody can be cool. I mean, with
No, that's
snakes
true.
anyway.
No, I love it, man. People, I no, seriously, like it's a good thing. I think, okay, I'm gonna bring us on one of our first major
Sure,
tangents.
sure.
So, um, so as I was a commercial illustrator for many years, where I was working in pre-production for games and film and doing freelance editorial illustration and freelance illustration for apparel for the jiu-jitsu community and all this stuff, right?
Mhm.
And when you're doing freelance commercial illustration specifically for the video game industry, there's like there's like two or three kinds of artists. You have the artists who are very, very good at character and creature design, right? AKA people who are very good with organic shapes and
Mhm.
being very creative with organic patterns. And then you have people who are very, very good at inorganic shapes, highly technical, rigid, mechanistic, people who can draw robots and cars and lands and like cityscapes. And they're great with more like plainer, straight edge stuff. And then you get
Mhm.
those kooky outliers who are people who can do everything, like a Craig Mullins, right? If just an incredible, can do any kind of drawing and painting. He can draw any kind of object. He's just amazingly capable, right? And um, you know, I think within commercial illustration, you have those three camps. And I think in reptiles or excuse me, rather in herpetoculture, you have the same thing. You have people who kind of specialize, like, well, I'm more of a snake guy. I'm more of a lizard guy. I'm more of a tortoise guy. I'm more of a frog guy. And then you got the people who are like, no, I've got everything. I work with everything and it's all awesome. And I have success breeding all of it. I'm able to mold and adapt. So far, I'm not that guy. I am desert lizards. That's my lane, and I stay in it for the time being. I'd like to branch out from that at some point, but yeah. So that's one of the reasons I failed with house snakes, because I didn't even fail. I didn't maintain my patience long enough
Mm.
to breed them. So
Gotcha.
anyway, tangent.
No, that's good. That's excellent. Um, let's try to get back on track here with my brain now.
Yeah, my bad.
No, so yeah, so I bred house snakes.
Yeah.
I think it was so I had my first pair. I think she only laid 3 eggs. Of course, they hatched. No big deal. Um, and then cycled her again, which you don't do anything. They just cycle. And she ended up laying 3 clutches from that one breeding because
Mm.
they'll breed themselves to death. So that was pretty awesome. Initially, it was how am I going to sell these things? This is still kind of obviously pre social media, really doing anything. It was like back in the MySpace kind of times.
Mhm.
So before Facebook and all that stuff. But it was, let's see if I can sell some of these to pet stores, or um, a lot of them went to friends. I give them to people, which is still probably one of my issues is I just give stuff away to people, which not real good business sense, but I can't help it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so it kind of went on like that for a few years. My collection grew from, I don't know, a handful of snakes up to about 40-ish or so, maybe 50 snakes. Primarily colubrids with some boas, some ball pythons. I had rosy boas, but you know, I haven't figured them out. They're just cool.
Mhm.
I love them to death, and every time I get, I look at them at shows and think, oh man, I'd love to have a rosy boa, and then I get bored of it. So I just have
Mhm.
to, and there's nothing wrong with them. I lose interest really fast on rosy boas. So anyway, and so it kind of went on like that for 4 or 5 years, where making $50 here, $100 here, whatever it is, kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
like, oh, I can go out, take my girlfriend to a nice dinner because I sold some snakes today or whatever. But
Mhm.
um, it really wasn't until like the last, I don't know, probably 5 or 7 years where I really started to stop spending more than I was making, and hitting a point where I'm producing a lot of babies. The market is relatively stable and good. People want, they want a good starter snake, or maybe something even a little fancier. And so I guess it's just kind of progressed that way. But the ultimate goal would just not to be to have a regular day job. But I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. So we'll see how that goes. But in my current situation, I'm kind of maxed out on space. My wife and I bought a house almost 2 years ago now, and we have the snake room, and it is maxed capacity. There's no room in that room anymore. And we actually have twins on the way, so I can't
Yeah.
expand into the
Wow.
other bedroom at all. So, which is fine.
Congratulations.
It's probably good. So,
Mhm.
um, and the number of animals I have is about what I can handle on my own, working my regular job. So I just have to either upgrade what I'm keeping, or just kind of hang with it. I'm just having a good time with it. Like I said, I give stuff away. I meet lots of cool people, and it definitely pays for itself. So as long as it does
Mhm.
that, we'll stick with it. So
Yeah, that's great. And do you have, so I know you have your colubrids, but I've also been seeing some of these beetles, these
oh yeah.
what are they, what's the
Goliath
proper
beetles.
So,
Goliath beetles?
so yeah, so in the US, we're really limited with the exotic beetles that you can keep legally.
Mhm.
It's a USDA issue. It shouldn't
Mm.
be a USDA issue because the vast majority of the popular beetles in, say, like Japan or Thailand, the larval stage is the stage that eats the most and lives the longest,
Mhm.
but they're eating primarily rotting vegetation. They're not eating, fresh living vegetation. So the
Mm.
issue in the US is that, these beetles are going to get out, they're
Yeah.
going to wreak havoc on our agriculture. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So with that being said, there was some brown box deals I did for a while, just because I wanted rhino beetles and I wanted stag beetles and flower beetles. And I kind of figured out, I bought a beetle breeding book that was written in Mandarin that was translated to English, and it was out of print, and it was the most I'd ever. I think it was $300 for this book. I've never spent that much on a book. It was crazy.
Mhm.
And so, because in the US, I can't go to the store and buy the substrate for these beetles, or, it's just not available. You have to make it yourself. So,
Right.
going out in the woods, finding rotten oak, or just taking wood and fermenting it yourself. And, I kind of made my own, I figured out how to make my own, like my own recipe for this rotten wood, using, hard oak wood pellets, flour, yeast, brown sugar, cooking it up, letting it sit for about 3 months, and then it was palatable for these bugs. Basically, the
Mhm.
wood has lignin and cellulose, and the lignin, they can't digest the lignin. So you
Mm.
have to have something to go in there first and pre-digest it. So you have to use a yeast or other kind of fungus, um, to make that cellulose available. And then they just eat it like crazy because there's really not a lot available in the cellulose. Anyway,
Mhm.
that was a lot of fun. I thought, oh, I'm going to make all kinds of money breeding beetles. That didn't happen at all either. Nobody was dedicated here in the US to make their own substrates.
Mm.
And so people, they want to buy a larva from me, and they want to buy, substrate that's going to last them the 2 years it's going to take for that thing to turn to an adult. It's like, well,
Mhm.
I make enough for me.
Two
Yeah.
Well,
years?
it could be 2 years. Yeah, I see Phil over there. The fast ones, I could usually go like egg to adult in about a year.
Wow.
I had some larvae that took these elephant beetles. It took 3 years to go from egg to adult.
Wow.
So
What?
you got this bug living in a tub of dirt, and you never see it, and it comes out, and it breeds and it lives for 3, 4 months and dies. So But then you get
So
like, you know,
interesting.
you can see the cool stuff kind of behind me. You know, you
Yeah.
get cool stuff, you know, afterwards, and it lasts forever. So,
Mhm.
but fast forward, some guys here in the U.S. did some um, really laid the groundwork for Goliath beetles. Now, Goliath beetles are different because they are not eating vegetative material; they're eating protein. So
Mm.
there's three larval stages: L1, 2, and 3, and then they pupate and then become adults. So in the first larval stage, which for most beetles is very short, they eat a little bit of vegetative material, but as soon as they start to get any size, they're going after worms and other bugs that are in the substrate with them, and
Wow.
that's what they eat. And um, their legs actually have hooks on them that are designed to grab prey, and they just munch it down.
Whoa.
So yeah, it's pretty gnarly. So I actually just posted a video of one of my larvae, and it like tried to bite me, and I don't want to get bit. So anyway, these guys, you know, basically came to the USDA and said, "Hey, look, these things are not a threat to agriculture at all." You know, and so I think at the moment there's three species of Goliath beetle that are legal for trade in the U.S. and it's really not that
Wow.
difficult. I actually feed them a mixture of koi food and um, oh, what's the brand? Is it Hikari? The Massivore diet, I think, is a Hikari.
Oh,
Anyway, it's a diet made for big predatory fish. It's got a really high protein content and almost no fat. And these things are just growing like crazy. And then you get into pupate and breed, but they're super cool. The nice thing about the Goliath beetles is they have a reasonably long lifespan as adults. You know, it's roughly the same as the pupa, or as not as the pupa, as the larva. So you're not sitting for 3 years for a bug that's going to live 2 weeks or whatever. Um, so yeah, just really cool. So it's just something different. In that whole process, uh, you know, back with the other beetles, I realized how important there's a lot of people talking about bioactive setups
Mhm.
nowadays, right? And how and it just it grinds my gears. I'm not gonna lie. It nails me to the chalkboard when I hear it because I look at these bioactive setups and they're squeaky clean. First of all,
Mhm.
there's no fungus, there's no mycelia. The bio load for the size of the enclosure is way too high. Um, and realizing that like fungus is really what it takes for the world to go around. It's pretty
Mhm.
impressive. So
yeah.
anyway, I mean, call it bioactive. When I was a kid, it was just a vivarium. That's what we called them. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
guys are probably on the same boat. But like the dart frog keepers, the micro gecko keepers, I believe you can do a full bioactive, like a legitimate bioactive with those species. But when I see someone with like a boa and they're calling their setup a bioactive, it's like, to the number of bugs you'd have to have in there to eat that huge turd from that boa,
Yeah.
it's not a self-contained system. So not to discourage people from keeping things naturalistically, but you know, and maybe it's just semantics. You know, it is what it is. But anyway, there's,
Yeah.
as you said, tangents. So
I can relate on that one. I often feel a little bit irked by that term too, and just like how flippantly it gets used. And
right.
um,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, people ask me about that a lot with like the spilotes, the big biotope that I have with the spilotes, and like, how do they, like, you must spot clean, and I don't, but the trick is, or the catch is, that I have like over a yard of soil in that setup.
Right. Right.
it's it's a huge amount, it's a huge volume of substrate. And even then I know that it's got a expiration date at some point,
Right.
where
Right.
some will have to be cycled out and then cycled back in. But anyway,
You
it's
know,
so
this,
interesting, like the whole concept of like a predatory larvae of beetle larvae is like so wild
yeah.
to me, and it totally just triggered this memory I had from childhood of like, I had I called it like my woodland terrarium, and it was basically just a terrarium, one of those old metal framed 15-gallon terrariums with like a screen top that my dad had
Yep.
made. And I just like filled it with like dirt and oak leaf litter from the backyard and rotting oak, like,
Right.
and I would catch millipedes and stuff in the backyard and throw them in there, and they would eat the rotting oak and excrete these pellets. And one time, um, I used to go with my dad every night. We would walk down this driveway, his long driveway, and close the front gate. And I loved going with him because there would always be salamanders, ensitinas or arboreal salamanders, out on the driveway.
Let's
You could see them with
go.
our flashlights. And one night we saw this larvae, this like beetle larva, and we didn't know what it was. But we grabbed it, and this thing probably about 3 inches long, and
Yep.
threw it in my woodland terrarium with all my millipedes and stuff just to see what it was going to do. And after a couple days, I started noticing that the millipedes were dead and they were just like empty exoskeletons.
Did you find
I
a
was like,
lightning? Did you find like a glowworm?
exactly. Yeah.
What?
And I had no idea at the time what it was. And I didn't know what was
Yeah.
happening at first. I couldn't figure out what was happening.
Yeah.
I was like, what's happening to my millipedes? And then I saw it attack and kill a millipede. And I was like, it was like, at the time I found it a little bit disturbing. I was like, what do I have here? What is this thing? Because it just
Right.
was so foreign to me that like a beetle larvae or a glowworm larvae or whatever it was going to eat these millipedes. But so amazing to see that process play out. One of those like early
Yeah.
memories of my childhood of just like an early aha moment of like, wow, nature is amazing.
Well, I've got one similar. So I was a kid that had a little mason jar, and I think I caught a praying mantis or a cricket. I don't know what it was, but
Mhm.
again, I was living in an apartment complex. We couldn't have pets, but I could keep little bugs. So I don't know what possessed me, which one I caught first, but I had one. I caught another. Either it was the mantis or the cricket, and I wanted to put them together. My parents kind of warned me, hey, maybe you don't want to do that. And
Mhm.
was like, no, no, it'll be cool. I can have them together. And well, of course, the mantis ate the cricket.
Yeah.
Um, and I was a terrible child because I was so mad. I must have had the cricket first. I was
Uh-huh.
so mad that the mantis ate the cricket that I pulled that mantis out and I like cut his head off. I was
Oh.
so such a terrible child. But I was like, he ate my cricket. How could he do that? It's just a pile of legs at the bottom of the little mason jar. I
Uh-huh.
was so upset. And of course,
Uh-huh.
that's not going to solve anything killing my mantis. That's just what they do. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, man, the
When
same
you're a little
thing.
kid, you don't
It's,
know.
my parents tried to warn me, like, hey, probably not a good idea. They didn't tell me why. I don't
Mhm.
know why they didn't tell me why. I mean, we probably had a second mason jar, but anyway. So yeah, there's that. But that's
Another
just
fun
crazy
one
stuff, man.
oh yeah. Another fun one was I had pet black widow at one point. And of course she laid an egg sac.
Oh
And of
God.
course the egg sac hatched. And I distinctly remember like just this trail of little baby black widow spiderlings going right
Oh,
through the little mesh in the top of
Yep.
my pickle jar or whatever I had her in, and just spreading out into the house and being like, all right, I'm
oh,
not gonna mention this to mom.
Oh man, yeah, I did the exact same thing happened a few years ago. Actually, I was before my wife and I are married. She's like, "Man, there's a huge black widow over at the house. Like, come get it. Like, it's huge." So I went over to her place and grabbed up this black widow, and it had a egg sack or whatever,
Yeah.
and set it up in a big big deli cup,
Mhm.
and which it was surprising to me because I had removed the egg sack from her, like they were separate. When I put her in there with the egg sack, she ran around looking for the egg sack. I actually went and grabbed it
Yeah.
and brought it back up with her, which I hadn't observed that with black widows before, so that was pretty neat. But yeah,
Yeah.
same thing. Came home one night and I had the deli cup on my bathroom counter, and yeah, the entire sink was a spider web full of little dots of baby black widows. I was just like, oh no, oh no, what do I do? So I tried to cup up as many as I could and just put them outside, but
Mhm.
I don't know, a bunch of them I'd probably just squished a bunch just to not have to worry about it. But
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
that's a that's a
do you not
hard.
like do you not like spiders, Phil?
I do not. This is a hard no for me, gentlemen. I mean, look,
Wow.
I
Interesting.
will.
Here we go.
No, no. Listen. They're great. They're beautiful. I admire arachnids of all kinds. They're really amazing. Um, but I must admit that when I was very young, like 4 or 5 years old, I watched Arachnophobia somehow.
Oh.
I don't know what it is, and it scared the shit out of me. Like
Mm-hmm.
my mom tells the story is like I used to collect spiders from the yard, and then I watched that movie one night when my dad had his Navy buddies over for a party, and they were all, fucking around in the kitchen doing their thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
parked myself in front of the TV, and the TV had on arachnophobia. And a little 5-year-old brain, I never screwed with spiders after that.
Yep.
Uh,
Got you.
I love that movie.
yeah, no, it's great. It's a funny movie, and I messed
Well,
around with.
it's actually some cinematic history. I think it was the first time anybody in the U.S. filmed in Venezuela.
Oh,
Okay,
If I'm
interesting.
not mistaken. I think
didn't
that
know
opening
that.
scene was filmed on location. Yeah. So
Wow,
anyway, no, I love so Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with the scorpion killing Auntie.
Uh-huh.
hell yeah,
That messed me up, dude.
yeah.
I cried over that ant, and I was terrified of scorpions.
What?
Just scared of them from I was a little kid, man. It was just traumatic. Like,
It's
how could the
hilarious.
scorpion be so mean to this ant? And oh, just nah, freaked
Well,
me out, man.
and in fairness, I got bit by uh a Indian ornamental at the reptile shop
Ooh.
where I used to work. Yeah, and so that
Ay, ay,
screwed with me.
ay.
It was like a total fluke. I was being an idiot, and it was an act. I wasn't trying to hold the thing. It was just an accident cage cleaning. You know what I mean? And
Uh-huh.
no one told me. Oh yeah. And then there was the fucking time this one guy. Oh my God, dude. So the Indian ornamental was one thing, and that was a whole thing in and of itself. But there was a guy who used to work at the reptile shop called Reptilian Haven where I worked, and this guy, his name was Aaron, and this guy was like obsessed with arachnids, like obsessed with arachnids, which is great. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad that there are people like that guy out in the world. Um, and he was jacking around one day with this big shipment of arachnids that we'd gotten in, and there was a real small quarter, maybe silver dollar sized tarantula of some
Mm-hmm.
variety that he cracks open the deli to be like, look at the beautiful. He was going to show me something about the iridescence on
Mm-hmm.
the animal, and the thing jumped out of the deli into the under the table where we were unpacking the animals. There was a big trough that held an Aldabra tortoise, a young Aldabra, a very young Aldabra. And the spider fell into the Timothy hay that was the bedding for that Aldabra.
Mm-hmm.
Never found that fucking spider.
Mm-hmm.
Never. And it just screwed with me the whole day. Not the day, but the whole rest of my time there. I was like, we never found that fucking spider. Oh my God. Like it's somewhere here. And it just, man, I don't know what it is. Again, I have I have a whole folder on my desktop of beautiful arachnids from around. They're amazing. And I'm not like horrified of them, I'll hold them. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like that. There's just, I can't shake the weird, like, when they move, I'm like, like it just gets me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, Christ, you know? So like I feel a little bit ashamed for that reason, because
That's
it's
funny.
just spiders too. It's not scorpions. Well, no, that's not true. Whip scorpions fuck me up. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna go do one more tangent, just
No,
one
go,
more.
go, go, go.
Only one.
For now,
Okay,
one
fair,
in this moment. For
fair. Go
now.
ahead. Go ahead.
So, I lived in Austin, Texas for a little while, and
Mm.
I was doing art school there, and so I had my sketchbook with me everywhere we go. And there was a thing where one of the assignments was to draw something from your experiences. Well, at the time, I was using online dating, so I was meeting all these girls on Tinder, and I met one girl who was really interested. There's a bunch of cave systems all over Austin, like long cave systems, just everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, I really want to go to one of these. And so I was like, all right, like I'm trying to be ballsy and look cool. And so we go, and I'm not cool with caves. Like I'm just not, no way, not
I
okay,
love where this
dude.
is going.
Nope. And so we crawl in through this cave where there's maybe like a 10-foot stretch where, it's real small entry point. but you crawl in maybe 10, 20 feet or so, and you enter like a real small little gallery that's maybe 4 feet tall and I don't know, 10-ish feet diameter kind of space. And you can go off in like 2, maybe 3 directions. And we're sitting in there, and there's like beer bottles, and there's old candles and condom wrappers, and you name it, right? Just a bunch of garbage. And I click the light on my phone, and I'm looking around, and I shine it on the ceiling, and there were like just an unbelievable number of these cave crickets, like these long-legged, they looked like arachnids. And I screamed bloody murder and ripped out the entrance to that cave so fast. I was like, fuck no, no. And eventually I did like a whole sketchbook project where I took photos of those cave crickets and then made like this big elaborate drawing series of like riffs on those things. But dude, there's something about that arachnid body type, that body style, that kind of movement that just gives me the willies. And I can't wrap my mind around it. And I feel terrible because, you know, I got love for my arachnid friends, you know, I don't hate them. I try not to kill them when they're in my house, you know, like I want them to be here. They're great. I love biodiversity, but I'm a hater, bro. I'm a little bit of a hater. Just like a little teensy. We know we got to have more arachnid keepers on the podcast too, because we haven't had any yet.
Yeah,
well,
we do.
Actually, I mean, maybe.
We've had a couple.
Yeah, I've got some spiders. Yeah.
All right, so hey, you and Nathan, right? So this would be the two. All right,
yeah.
Okay, all right, we're getting a little representation in here. All right.
Well, did you get a second date with that gal?
No, not at all. But that's okay. She was whack. But you guys. So I'm gonna go fill up my drink. Keep this conversation rolling. This is whiskey, by the way, so that's why.
Oh, nice. There we go.
That's what's going on.
That's why the tangents.
Let's go. Oh.
So for me, it's not arachnids, but I do have to admit. So Chris, my partner and I, Catherine and I, just moved out to a little spot in Lake County. So you're local to me, so you know what it's like out there.
Yeah.
And you know, I grew up in Sonoma County, more coastal. And one thing I noticed pretty much immediately moving out there is that the insect diversity is totally different. And we've got all kinds of like what I associate with desert insects showing up there because it's, you know, more arid, hotter. And along with that, we have sulfugids and scolopendra centipedes. And both of which I regularly find.
You have the big scolopendra or the little guys, like the little tiger ones?
The big ones.
Like the little guys or like the big guys?
The biggest one I've seen of the ones we have was like 6 inches long.
That's solid. Okay.
Yeah, and it was that I was surprised. I was like, "Whoa, we do not have," because none of that stuff occurs in Sonoma County. You just don't see it out there. I mean, maybe on the far eastern side, you know, where you get a little bit more inland, but it's been interesting. And I have to admit, like, they creep me out a little bit. Like, I appreciate them. I like to look at them. But we're actually sitting in the cabin watching a movie one time, and I felt something kind of on my foot, and I looked down, and there's one of these scolopendra just on my foot, and I'm like, no, thank you. Like, I kind of flick it off, you know, I flick it off my foot, and it goes and scuttles into the closet, and was, you know, gone from that point on. But it was like, it's like there's something about like, I can appreciate this thing, but I don't want it on me.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
I'm
that's
sure
fair.
it's similar with how Phil feels about spiders, but like when it comes to the whole movement thing that he's describing, I really get that with the sulfugids because they're so fast.
Dude, they're so fast. Like, it's so fucked up.
Like it is amazing how fast they move.
Well, not just that, but their mouth parts are scary.
Their mouth parts are scary.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's like a dual, like,
it's like the predator. You know, it's the predator. It's like there's and they'll do the whole threat posture thing with the front
Right.
legs, you know, up,
Right.
and it's like, okay, man, I don't want any piece of that. I know you're like, you know, you weigh like a gram, but I'm not gonna mess with you.
Right.
And
Dude,
anyway,
Nathan's gonna come back on this show and be like, listen, you two have no or cajones, you know.
it's true. It's
I'm
true.
like, but
I
It's in
do have
lot,
a fun
fellas.
spider story for Phil though.
Let's hear it. Yeah, let's hear it.
So I was 17. We went with this church group. We went and we're camping on Catalina Island. Not Catalina. I'm sorry, not Catalina. What's the one just north? Anyway, one of the Channel Islands. We're camping on it, right?
Yeah.
The name will come to me later, I'm sure. Anyway, so we're camping out, and the weather was great, so we didn't zip up our tents or anything.
Mhm.
And I'm sleeping in my bag, and I feel something by my leg. I'm like, oh, that's kind of funky.
Nope.
And I was like, oh, it's got to be a spider. So I sit up and I'm smashing my sleeping bag, trying to smash this thing. It's like, okay, I got it. Go back to sleep. And then I don't know how much longer later, feel something by my leg, and my hand is down by my leg. And so I just grab it and I bring it up to my face, and I open my hand, and it's this wolf spider that's like that big, dude. Just, and they don't bother me, but that bothered me, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
They
anyway,
don't
Santa
bother
Cruz,
me,
Santa
but
Cruz
that
Island,
bothered
Santa
me.
Cruz Island. That's it.
You could
Santa
never.
Cruz, yep.
Here's the thing: you give me a snake, it's never gonna be that way. You give me a beetle, I'm not gonna bug out. It's
Mhm.
gonna
I
be
don't know, man. There's some beetles that you might want to bug out on.
Yeah.
really why.
I'm just saying, man. There's some beetles with some big old chompers,
Big old
man.
mandibles. Yep.
That's
Yeah, the big.
what freaks me out. The bite is not what scares me.
Mm.
It's
Okay.
something with an arachnid. It's got nothing to do with the bite. It's the
That's exactly how they move,
Yeah.
the
like a jellyfish.
it's like the kung fu, man. Like there's something about that hydraulic motion that's just like, fuck,
Mm.
Jesus Christ, get that, it's like
It's
it
very different.
activates the disgust. I mean, that's not fair. It's not disgust. It's really not. But like I feel that way. I feel, Roy, I feel you with the sulfugids. There's something
Mhm.
about those. Oh man. The worst ones though are the camel spiders.
Yes.
Camel spiders, those things ignite in me a terror that I cannot describe. And I wish that it wasn't like that, because they are remarkable. Like,
Yeah,
they
they're really
truly,
amazing.
objectively, I mean it when I say I can separate my terror from appreciation for nature and the fact that this thing has evolved to be this part, like, awesome. The fact that it scares the piss out of me, and I'm like, dude, you go. I'm going to give you 10 feet. I'm not going to touch you. Not even close. Ooh, man. I didn't even know. Okay. I have another thing I want to get at here in a second,
Okay.
but I was staying at a friend's place in Arizona, and I was out walking around at night in this, it was June or July with Camille, and the gentleman we were staying with has walls made of cinder blocks to pen in a bunch of tortoises that he keeps. And there was a fucking camel spider on one of the walls. And I was like, no, they live in America? Fuck no. Like, no, I'm moving. I'm going somewhere where these things don't live. It scared the hell out of me, man. They freaked me the hell out. Okay.
How big was it?
It was like a little teensy it was a little baby.
Okay.
It was like yay big. It was like
So those,
an inch and a half long.
not only do those live in America, Phil, they live in my house. I've seen them in my house.
Never, dude. You're I'm sorry, Roy. You're great, and I love you as a person. I'm never gonna visit your house now. It's never gonna happen. There's a reason I live in Colorado, bro. No, but
I can tell.
No, but
they might actually be there in Colorado too. You just haven't seen them.
I bet.
Shut your mouth.
I'm just saying, there's a good chance.
Shut your mouth. I'm just kidding.
Not southwest corner of Colorado.
God
I don't know, man.
Yep.
No,
I bet they're there.
It's so funny, man, because I actually feel like I feel like I felt this way when I entered art school. And what I mean by this is when I entered college for art, I encountered a ton of people who knew way, 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 way more about the process of art making, the history of art making, you name it. You know, people, you know, like a teacher would give an assignment, like, I'm going to need you to do this kind of portrait on vellum Bristol, and it's got to be adhered to this style of board, and it's got, you know, it's got to have these dimensions with a bleed and all this other. And I'm like, what the fuck is Bristol? I don't know. I don't know what that is. I didn't know at the time. And to a certain degree, I feel a little bit of this kind of imposter syndrome with herpetoculture, you know, because I've hit like this. Here we are making a podcast, and I'm learning so many new things every single episode we do. And I'm just like, oh man, I don't know anything about this industry. Like, you know, I feel like I'm just figuring so much out about it as I go along. You know,
That's the Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it?
I think
That's
so.
exactly
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I mean,
I think once you hit that point, then you can actually like really progress with anything, honestly.
I
Mhm.
agree.
I think once you hit that point, then you really start to excel. So
Well, that's a highly charitable and gracious viewpoint, you know, because I feel like a total dummy, but I prefer your perspective, Chris, and I'm going to take that one. So thank you for that.
no, for sure.
No. Anyway, I derailed everything you guys were talking about while I was filling up my alcoholic beverage.
Oh, you're good. We were just talking about bugs.
They're so cool. So has your keeping of, like, because it sounds like the keeping of some of these bugs is just so different, so highly different from reptiles. Have they has your keeping of insects and bugs and what have you informed your keeping of reptiles and amphibians in any way?
Um, there's probably aspects of it that I feel could be kind of bridged across. I think the biggest thing is having to be very conscious of your time, being very dedicated to a schedule. Um, you know, with these, when I was raising all the beetles, you know, I had at one point several hundred larvae, you know, in various size containers, and you know, they eat what they live in. So you have to be really on top of, you know, how much food is left in the container, you know. So, you know, sifting through and taking out they call the poop frass pellets, right? So taking the frass out, you know, adding new substrate, and just really staying on top of knowing, you know, each individual and trying to give them what they need. So probably, you know, with regards to that, being more observant with reptile stuff and trying to read their body language and their behavior. What do they need? What do they not need? You know, what are they trying to tell me? That kind of stuff. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's like a straight across, but definitely, you know, especially with the time management, like I have to set this time aside to do this because it needs to be done. You know, it's like you can push some stuff off, but you know, for me, you know, having a very set schedule, I feel like I thrive more with that. Like there's some things I can be fluid with, but having at least some rigidity with some aspects of my my herpetoculture, my herp keeping, definitely helps things out along the way. So
Okay, I want to see if I can get you to break this apart a little bit more.
sure.
In what ways do you feel like your herpetoculture would improve with better time management?
How would it improve with better time management?
Because that's what you mentioned as like that's the crossover, right? Like keeping these beetle larvae and being super cognizant of how they're eating the bedding in which they live and having to change the frass and pull all of that out. How you kind of cited that as something that might cross over.
Right.
How do you mean? Because I feel I agree with you, right? Like there's ways in which I feel like my time management with my herps could be more regimented or more structured, more organized, more um I don't know what the word would be, more, you know, on point, right? But so in what ways do you feel like is there a way that less time management makes herpetoculture harder, or how does that cross over for you in your collection?
Well, so I actually just had this conversation with someone earlier, and I mean, I guess this is partly herpetoculture. So I breed my own rodents,
Oh,
just
nice.
because I can't afford to do what I do without it. So,
Okay.
um, and I think that's foundational for anybody that is keeping any kind of herps. If you can breed your own feeders, it's a huge benefit, right? So, yeah, grow some veggies there, Phil.
No, I
Any,
meant no, not the veggies. Well, wild foods for starters, but I've got a dubia colony and a superworm colony for my xenogama.
There you
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I was talking with a friend, actually, like I said today, about my mouse rack, and telling him, hey, I normally I clean every Saturday. Like that Saturday is set aside. That's my mouse day, right? Which coincidentally is also my feed day. It works out really well, or one of my feed days. So,
Mhm.
um, this last weekend, so a week ago, I was out of town, and so my mouse rack went like a day and a half past what it should have been, and I was commenting to him like I couldn't believe how messy it was, just an extra 36 hours or whatever. Like, that was just
Yeah.
crazy, like how
Mhm.
much more filthy everything had become, right?
Mhm.
And then this week, because I had done the rack late, but then I'm on schedule again now, just a day early, quote unquote, even though I was on
Mhm.
schedule, just how much cleaner everything was. And just it was a very really interesting observation with that. So I think what I can take away from that is, sometimes it's like, I could just spot clean and not clean the bedding. The bedding can go another week.
Mhm.
But I found that if I'm going to clean bedding, I should just clean the bedding. It doesn't take any longer to dump out a tub or to clean out an enclosure or whatever it is, and just put new fresh stuff in. And I mean, that filters down into other benefits. The room smells nicer, everything looks nicer. I'm sure the
Mhm.
snakes appreciate it more. Um, I don't know. I think that maybe answers your question, but
Yeah, it does.
I feel like I
it's
want to pull on this thread a little bit too,
sure, sure.
because I feel like there's something in this where it's like you also mentioned, there's certain things you can be more fluid with, and I think that I don't know. I think we spoke about this, before with someone on the podcast about just like, yeah, finding a balance between like fluidity and responsiveness, with your
Mm,
herpetoculture, and kind of like spontaneity and regimentation and rhythm. And yeah, this is something that I'm just always, I feel like I'm still in kind of a dynamic state with it. I don't feel like I've really settled on where I am with it. And in some ways, I think that that's because in some ways, like I feel like I'm like a born again herpetoculturist. I lost all of this time, and since coming back, I've only been in it for it's not even 5 years yet. And so anyway, I feel like there's some value there though to unpacking that, and just I'm curious about, yeah, what aspects of it, of your kind of rotation are kind of more fluid, what aspects are more regimented, and how does that change with like the size of the collection that one is working with, because I think that obviously that's a huge factor.
yeah, that's fair. And I think it's worth pointing out. We look at it through mammalian eyes, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
people are pretty regimented. We go to bed, we wake up, we eat our 3 square meals, whatever it is, right? And we're taking care of animals. Most herps and invertebrates, they're opportunistic. They don't
Mm-hmm.
eat every Saturday or every Sunday, whatever it is. They eat when there's food, and they don't when there isn't food. So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to take, you know, people will often ask me, oh, what day does this snake normally get fed? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I normally feed it on this day because that works for me, but what works for you? Because whatever day you feed it is going to work for that snake.
Right.
Yep.
So, um, as far as the fluidity of things, with my hatchling, my young animals, my grow ups, I'm pretty strict about, or I try to be anyway. I don't want to hold myself too high of a standard, but
Mm-hmm.
I try to be pretty strict about they're going to eat on this day. Certain species might get fed twice a week, which I know people oh, you're power feeding. It's like,
How
I'm
dare
not,
you?
man.
No.
This thing is pooping this 2 days after I feed it. I'm
Yeah.
not overfeeding it, you know. And
Mhm.
then when you look at, you know, when you're breeding, let's say king snakes, right? You know, those females, when they're building follicles and developing eggs, you know, they have a high caloric intake. You can't just feed once a week.
Mhm.
Typically, you
Mhm.
know, I've done it both ways. I fed once a week, and there's, you know, that works. But you know, you can feed. Sometimes I'll feed a tiny meal every other day
Yeah.
Mhm.
because they can digest it faster. The nutrients is available really quickly. But on the flip side of that, those males, like, they're not burning calories. You know, once they breed, they're just hanging out. I don't need to feed my males every week, you know.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and it's hard, I think, you know, as is the hobby is concerned, you know, again, looking through my million eyes, oh, my snake looks hungry. It's like, what does look hungry mean? Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
You're putting a label on something,
Yeah.
and oh, because it's active. Well, why is it active? You know, is it, oh, I knew it was hungry because it was moving around. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Like,
Mhm.
when your kid is standing, you know, sitting still, is it not hungry? And when your kid is walking around, is it hungry now? Like, where does that come from? You know, so
Mhm.
there's some weird disconnects there, but um, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to, like you said, there's a lot to unpack, and it's hard to on the fly really get into it. But
Yeah.
you know, I think feeding is probably the biggest one, because again,
Mhm.
it's such a stark contrast, um, from everything else. You know, even a dog or a cat. I mean, you guys have dogs and cats. Well, I don't know if Phil has a dog, but
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I got a
yeah,
golden.
yeah. So your dog probably gets fed what, once a day, maybe twice a day, depending on, twice a
Right.
day. Okay,
Mhm.
you know, and that's probably a more human thing. You know, in the wild,
Mhm.
if we're assuming a wild dog, right? I mean, if you
Mhm.
Yeah.
get a small canid like a fox or something like that, yeah, they're gonna kind of eat throughout the day. But something big like a wolf, they might
Mhm.
only eat every couple of days,
Or once a
Yeah.
you know,
week.
depending. So
Yeah.
anyway, just a weird thing. So we schedule our animals around our schedules. Um, so I guess that's the rigidity that you have to be fluid with at the same time. It's almost like the rocks in a river, you know?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
what's more powerful? Is it the rocks that force the water to go around, or is the water more powerful because it wears the rocks away? So
Mhm.
Right.
anyway, I
Right.
don't know. I don't
No,
know.
that's
It's a lot, like you said, lot to unpack, and it's hard to get all to it all at once. So
Yeah.
no, that's
Yeah. That's
fascinating.
true.
So I just had this I just had someone over at my shop, someone who may become someone who helps out there from time to time because uh I posted on my Instagram last week that I'm looking for help basically.
yep.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I was telling the guy, he's a great guy, really nice person. I was telling him like, look, I'm not the kind of guy who has to make everything the shop space. Everything outside of those enclosures, I don't give a shit what's happening for the most part. Like, yes, I
Mhm.
care about cleanliness and quarantine and like functionality, but I couldn't give a goddamn if like my cages line up perfectly or if they're measured well or I
Mhm.
don't care if I've got 5 light fixtures over one cage and 3 over the one next to it or
Mhm.
all of these things. For me, the focus is the interior of the enclosure, the space in which that animal dwells. That's what I give a shit about, you
Mhm.
know? And there's something about this where I'm not trying to poop, not trying to like down on people who, like I know Roy is very different from me in that regard. Everything he has, all of his enclosures are immaculate and like well constructed, well put together, well maintained. There's a lot of like organization behind all of that. And for me, I feel confined by that kind of aesthetic. And I don't,
Mhm.
again, Roy, I know that you're better at this than I am. So it's not like
I get it,
it's
Phil.
not like
Shots fired. Shots fired. I get it.
yeah, right. A good friendship is one in which we can disagree and argue. But
Exactly.
like I I feel completely confined by that because there's something about the fact that I don't clean their shit on a regular schedule. It seems like I need to clean today. And then there's 4 days that might go by without cleaning turds. And it's like,
Mhm.
I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's the wrong thing, right? The feeding schedules. Yeah, sure. for me, it's more about the macro view. I feed more in spring and summer and less in fall and winter. But it doesn't mean that they get food every single day in spring and summer and they never get food in fall and winter. It's all responsive. It's all improvisational. And this feels super related to martial arts in some ways, right? You have martial artists. Well, let's, in this case, maybe we'll use something that we've all observed, like MMA fighters, right? You have MMA fighters who are highly tactitious, right? It's I've got a strategy and a game plan and I'm sticking the fuck to it. I don't care what happens. This is the plan. And then you have those weird virtuoso improvisational performances that are much more like I didn't think about it. I didn't drill this in particular. I reacted in the moment and it fucking worked, right?
Yeah.
And it worked great and it was perfect timing. And I feel like you have that dichotomy in herpetoculture too, where you have those individuals who are highly regimented and everything they do looks perfect and they've got beautiful caging systems and there's a systemization to what they do that yields excellent results. But then you also have the other way around too, where you have herpetoculturists who are purely improvisational, who are reacting in the moment, who are much more like reactive than they are proactive in some ways. And you also get great results out of that, you know? And, you know, you said, Chris, you were talking about this, my snake looks hungry, which is a very mammalian centric perspective. And I feel like it's ever more interesting to me the way some herpetoculturists really are able to tailor that anthropocentrism into something that yields really, really cool results. And then you have the people who really bend themselves and their own perception around what they're keeping in a way that makes their regiment seem much more specific to those animals and also yields really cool results.
I think that's a really good point, but I would argue that even with as regimented as Roy may appear, I would argue he probably improvises here and there,
Sure.
for the moment kind of thing. Because like I said, I'll feed. You just know, like you learn your animals, and it's like when I go to feed, it's like, you know what, like I'm just not going to feed you today, and it's just something you feel. You don't know it, you can't teach it. And with regards to my comment about my snake looks hungry, you don't ever hear that from someone who's been keeping stuff for more than 5, 6, 10 years. That's a very like new keeper type mentality. But there's good things about that, because they are someone who, after that 30 days, they're cleaning the enclosure, they're scrubbing it down, and they're scrubbing that water bowl, and they get all wild about it. And is it necessary? Maybe not. But they're not ones that improvise. Like, they have a real strict schedule, and their snakes are super healthy, their lizards are healthy, whatever it is. You get some people that put 6 inches of substrate, pine or whatever it is, and they don't clean until the snake goes into brumation. Obviously those are like super extremes, but there's more than one ways to do things. And like I said, I think you can be as regimented as you want, but I think that there's times where you just get a feeling, and that just comes with experience. It comes with practice, and like your martial arts. I know nothing about martial arts. My brother did Aikido for a while. I thought it was kind of a joke. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, I think Aikido's bullshit. So that's
okay.
Fine.
Well, there we go. We can be friends. I mean, I guess it teaches you to show up to class on time or something. I don't know, but anyway, you'll see people that I think this goes with any walk of life, with anything. You get like classical musicians who just feel something. Like, you're playing the same notes because that's the song you're playing, but you feel it, and you change. You hold it for an extra half step or whatever it is, and it just changes the mood of things. So
it's art, anyway. Man.
we're just, yeah.
Herpetoculture, herpetoculture is art for sure. You know,
Yeah.
there's so much craft in this, and it's like right now this is highly pertinent to my day-to-day at the shop because it's early breeding season. Right now is when everything starts mating, you know. And the like there's just a feeling I get sometimes when I look at a Euro and I'm like, I bet if I put a male in right now, she probably mate. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And every year that goes by, I'm much more accurate. I'm way more like there's just something, you know, it's incredible the level to which you can tune in to the animals that you're keeping, you know, for better or for worse, right? Like, you know, it's like that tug of war. Like we all have dogs, right? So I've got my golden Roy has a legitimate wolf. Chris, I imagine you have canines.
My wife has a dog that I have to take care of, so.
Okay, yeah, right. But
No,
one of
she's a
the
good dog. She's a good dog.
right. One of the things you learn really quickly is that the dog manipulates your perceptions too. The dog learns, oh, when you say, "Are you hungry?" The dog's like, you know, the dog will get hyped up and will kind of like make you it makes you think, it like confirms the thing that you thought was
Right.
going on,
Right.
even if that's not exactly really what's happening, right?
Right.
And there's something about this that I feel like, man, I feel like herpetoculture is in such a young place with this because there's no way that there are as many crossovers. Well, okay, maybe that's not the way to say it. Maybe the way to say it is like someone who's been keeping and breeding king snakes for 40 years is going to have very, very different insights than someone who's been keeping and breeding bearded dragons for 40 years. Like it's a totally different set of insights. And yet it's herpetoculture. We're keeping reptiles and amphibians, right? Someone who's been keeping and breeding various dart frogs for 30 years is going to have totally different This is why we have this fucking show, is like to break into these like these differences that are all under the same umbrella of to creep, right? We talked about this, Roy, right? To creep,
Yeah.
which is like infuriating. That's the term we're
Yeah.
using. We gotta recapture some more dynamic. Well, then we'd have to change the name of the show. Never mind. But like, no, I mean, I feel like this is really what's so cool about this. You know, Chris, hearing you talk about the way the various kinds of things you're keeping are informing the way you think about why and how you keep in the first place, like that's a fascinating thing. That to me is like the meat and potatoes of why we do this kind of show in the first place, is to talk about this kind of stuff, you know?
Well, let's take another tangent here.
Yeah,
So we talked a little bit off air, off recording, if you want, about what I do right now. But previous to what I do now, I worked at a zoo. So actually, so I worked at a zoo, but not for the zoo. I got to make that distinction because I was afforded opportunities because of that a lot of zookeepers don't get. So we were free contact. I did a free flight bird show.
okay.
So we had an eagle and we had owls and hawks and parrots and cranes and hornbills, all kinds of stuff, right?
Wow.
I went into that job with zero bird experience, with zero training experience, and not really much of a showman. I mean, I like to be center of attention, but I'd never put on a show, let's say, right? So I went into this pretty much blind, but to be honest, that's what my employer wanted. He wanted someone who, you know, could take direction and, you know, follow, you know, basically just follow orders, right? Like, hey, feed this, clean this, whatever. And those of us who did that well, you know, obviously we went on and, you know, started working the show, training birds, whatever. So training dogs is very different from training birds. So when you train birds, it's a very passive approach.
Okay.
You have to let the animal basically chooses whether or not it wants to do what you're asking it to do, you know. And there's a shift in the training community, and we can even talk about reptile training too a little bit here, but there's a whole shift in the training community to go from, you hear people talk about dog training, like, oh, what commands does it know?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But we always use the term cues because you're giving them either a verbal cue or some kind of visual cue. Hey, I want you to do this. I'd like you to do this. And if you do it, you're going to get some kind of reinforcement, right?
Yeah.
And you learn real quick to read body language. And the confusing thing about, especially with parrots, is the body language for a parrot being excited is almost identical to the body language of "Don't f with me, I'm going to tear your face off."
Mhm.
So to the untrained eye, an excited bird, an excited parrot, and a pissed off parrot basically look the same, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely cues. The reason I bring that up with the passive training and the reading the body language is not only did it help with my day-to-day interpersonal relationships of reading body language, dealing with people on a daily basis, it actually influenced my herp keeping.
Mm.
Whoa.
This is super weird. And I try to explain this to people, and it's a really hard concept to explain, especially just typing it out on on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. But
Mhm.
I see people all the time. Hey, I got what's a king snake, and it's biting me and it's pooping all over. What do? I want it to be friendly. I want it to be tame. And 99 people will say, "Oh, you just got to handle it. It'll get
Mhm.
tired of it. It'll stop."
Oh
Mhm.
no.
And I'm the one that's like, why don't you just leave that thing alone for 2 years and then it'll be your friend? And they
Yeah.
look at me all weird and like, what are you talking about? And, you know, both work, right? Both definitely work. If you handle that snake and you force it to be in your hands and that snake realizes it doesn't matter how many times I bite this guy or piss all over him, he's not going to put me down.
Mhm.
The snake will stop doing those things because it's not worth its time.
Right.
It's the same thing of like breaking a horse, right? Like effectively the two defense mechanisms the snake had, doesn't work. So
Yeah.
they just stop, right? They give up.
Blooding
My
him.
approach has been, and this actually happened on accident, and I didn't realize it was happening, and I didn't put two and two together until I was, actively training birds, was that I had too many snakes to be able to play with them every day, quote unquote play, right? So um, they rarely got handled, but they were friendly, for about lack of a better term. They were docile. I could pick them up. They weren't biting. They weren't pooping. So I had to take a step back. Like, why? I'm not taming these things down, quote unquote, right? But they're
Mhm.
becoming tame. So why? And I realized that it's just positive interactions. Like, what happened? Like, what interactions does the snake associate me with? Oh, here comes food. Here comes clean water. I'm going to get some clean bedding. I'm not restricting the snake's movements. If I have to handle it, it's very brief, it's very short. I try to be as like polite or as gentle as possible. And the snake realizes I'm not a threat anymore. There's no reason to bite. There's no reason to poop because it doesn't have to, because I'm not, again, doesn't have to do those things. It could do those things, and sometimes they still do, but it doesn't feel like it can't do those things, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So, and you probably see that with your Euromastics, they associate you with food, they
yep.
associate you with, whatever it is. And you have, of course, they're all going to be different. They all have their own individual personalities,
Yeah.
but you don't have to. And then, I mean, we could talk about what makes a better breeder, like you did with Jordan Russell, but you know,
Mhm.
um, they naturally just acclimate, and you just become cage furniture or just part of their ecosystem, and it doesn't bother them anymore until you obviously encroach too far,
Mhm.
right? Like, how far you can push it with your euros before they're
Yeah.
going to bite you, or they're going to do whatever they're going to do, whip you with their tail or whatever. So
You know, yeah, no. I think this is highly interesting. I've recently started thinking about tame as the same as like a synonym for passive, you
Mhm.
know? Like it's not, I don't want a passive Euromastix, right?
Mhm.
I want a Euromastix that responds intelligently to what I'm doing.
Mhm.
If I get in there, like my Euros are smart. I've heard people say Euros are stupid or they're kind of dumb or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I mean, maybe they have like a blunted or maybe a more narrow set of responses, but they're not stupid. They're brilliant. My animals are so smart, man. They know
Mhm.
exactly what's going on all the time. I keep, you mentioned, I keep everything in these open top enclosures, And I've had a lot of people talk about how the front opening, like front sliding glass style opening enclosures, lend themselves to more tame uromastics. And I think they lend themselves to passive uromastics, not tame ones.
Right.
You know, my animals are so smart. They know, as you said, Chris, they know when I'm bringing food. I very rarely change their substrate or bedding, right? So I very rarely rip the bottom out of the enclosure and put them into some holding pen. You know, it never happens that way. So they learn to feel very comfortable with me interacting in the cage, with me pulling shit out of the cage, putting food in the cage, putting a male or a female into the cage, moving things around. They'll come over and explore. It's a very interactive experience. Whereas if I go in there and I try to grab them, everything changes. Now they don't want anything to do with me and they freak out and they rip. And that's exactly what I want. I want them to, it is a sign of good health when your animal behaves in a way that something is threatening, because it is. It's
Right.
the right thing to freak out when a human hand comes reaching into you from up above. That's the right response if you're a damn lizard. It's the right one, you know?
Well, I
And
think that's honestly, not to interrupt you there, but I think that's the
interrupt
same
me.
response if you were to corner your dog and stand over it and yell at it.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
You know? And you could, even with the birds that I work with at the zoo, people look at them and think, oh, they're so friendly. Oh, they love you. And it's like, no, this is a working relationship.
Yes.
I give you, you give me. That's how this works. And
Yes.
yeah, there were definitely some birds that I guess you could say haven't had an affinity for me. Maybe I wouldn't say they liked me per se, but
No,
we had we had a black vulture, right? So vultures are probably like the dogs of like the bird world, right? It watch like the documentaries. The biggest vultures eat first, and the medium sized and little ones, right? There's a pecking order, legitimately, right? And so our black vulture, anytime somebody new was going to work with this bird, he's like, let's see how much I can get away with, And vultures can bite really hard, like really, really hard. It's shocking. So this vulture had been hand raised, which usually makes hand raised birds are just psychopaths, right? For the most part, right? There's a few exceptions where you kind of want to hand raise. Corvids are an exception where you need to hand raise them, and owls are the same way. But for the most part, you want them to be raised by birds so they know that they are birds, right?
Yeah.
You see pet parrots that have plucked themselves bald because they don't know how to be birds, right? Anyway, another tangent.
Yeah.
But this vulture went from wanting to attack me and bite me any chance he got to, when I went in his enclosure, he would run over, squat down, want me to scratch his head. I could, pick him up, put him in my lap. He would preen my facial hair. He would stick his beak in my ear to try to clean my ear. Kind of freaky, because you know what that beak can do. I walked in there and sat down with shorts, and that head went straight up my short leg, and it was like, oh buddy, be nice to me, But we still, even with that, I wouldn't consider that bird liking me. That bird respected me. We had a good relationship. I would scratch his head, he would preen my shoes and my hair. That was the mutual benefit there.
It was trust.
Yeah, but he had his off days where he's like, you know what? I don't like you today, and I'm going to see what I can get away with. And anyway, it just more, again, tangent stuff, but just interesting information that maybe can help. I don't know. Shoot. But again, like you said about your lizards, if you go in and you try to pick them up from underneath, do they act totally different? Did they run over? Are they curious? Do they lick your fingers? Yeah.
Way more.
Because your body language tells them, hey, this guy's not coming to hurt me. And I think, Phil, maybe your relationship with the uromastics is very similar to how I dealt with training the birds, for the free flight stuff. It was very much hey, we're going to be cool with each other. I'm not going to do this to you. You don't do that to me. And everyone gets, to live and be happy. So I don't know.
No, you're totally right, man. It is, I have this ongoing joke with my dog, Lilu. We have this gag where as if, you know, me and my family, we say, we're all a pack. So me, my fiance, her sister, Lilu, our cats, we're a pack, right? And we have this weird kind of ongoing pet joke with the dog where it's, you know, I say this thing, which is free to go, but choose to stay. That's the best kind of pack there is.
Right.
Right. And like my reptiles, it's the same thing. I'm there's a very, very hard line between when they're not free to go, right? When it's a vet visit, when I need to move them from one cage to another, when I have to pull them out for like a medical examination or something, I have to move them. There's a very different reaction when they're not free to go and when they are free to go and when they choose to stay and interact with me. And I'd rather have a non-captive audience, you know? I'd rather have a relationship with my animals that looks a lot more like a trusting, involved, mutually interesting and interactive response than, oh, I can just reach in the cage and pick him up whenever I want. Did we lose Chris?
I'm still here. Did you lose me?
Oh no, it just froze for a second. Oh, good. I'm so glad that, okay.
I'm here.
Good. But I mean it. Like I would so much rather have, like, I don't want, you know, people will message me all the time and I know why they do this. I'm not trying to excoriate anyone for thinking or feeling this. I get it, right? People buy a pet and they want a pet because the paradigm under which they're thinking about this is dog and cat. Okay, word. I get it, right? Dogs and cats are very different. They've been with us for millennia. I'm asking most people to meet your herptile in the middle and recognize that they have not been with us for millennia. Meet them in the middle and recognize that the fact that you can even hand feed your animal is fucking insane. Like that is an interaction with another being that is mutually voluntary. And it is against the evolutionary well-being of that animal in theory, right? Like if you interacted with that animal in the wild and it came over to you to eat from your hand, it's taking a massive risk, and you should interpret that as a profound act of trust between species that is not common. That's rare in the world.
Also not, I would argue, not normal.
Not normal.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. Dude, this is a good convo. I love this. This is great.
So we can go back to birds. I know we're going to talk about birds. I apologize. There's a guy that kind of revolutionized bird training and falconry and whatnot. And he was working on a project in Alaska. I won't get into details, but he's training pigeons, right?
Yeah.
And training homing pigeons to fly a certain direction or whatever. And he kept losing his good homing pigeons to this Alaskan peregrine. This big falcon was taking his expensive homing pigeons. So he's like, well, I can't keep feeding this bird with my expensive birds. I'll toss out, like, call him a baggie, right? Just a common pigeon. Okay. So he traps some common pigeons. He's like, all right, before I fly my birds, I'm just going to throw this pigeon up. The falcon will eat it. Great, cool. Well, this totally wild bird just decided, like, hey, when I see this guy, food's coming.
Yep.
So, after a certain amount, I don't know how long this guy was working on this project, but it got to the point where he wasn't tossing birds out anymore. He was going and flushing wild birds to feed a wild falcon. Bird just knew, like, hey, when this guy comes around, there's going to be some food. I'm going to hang out. That's not normal, but what else do you call it? It didn't benefit him any, apart from the fact that it wasn't eating his birds anymore. But that falcon realized, hey, people aren't terrible. There's a free food source here. Like, why not, use it? So
they
I don't know, just weird stuff. There's lots of stories like that.
Yeah, birds are a great example of animals that will absolutely, exploit us for their own benefit, and I think a lot about accipiters in this regard, the Cooper's hawks,
psychopaths, man.
hawks,
Sharpies are cool. Sharpies are super cool.
They're amazing. So Phil, accipiters are a genus. It's a genus of hawks, and they primarily, at least in our region, they primarily specialize in eating songbirds. There's
sick.
also like goshawks, which you have out in Colorado.
Yeah.
They're the king of
So
the accipiters, but
I'll
they
interrupt
actually
you real
will,
quick, Roy.
yeah.
Let me
yeah,
interrupt you. So, Phil, when people talk about a chicken hawk,
Yeah.
they're usually talking about like a Cooper's hawk,
Yep.
Oh,
not
okay.
not a
All right.
red tail, not a red tail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Exactly.
anyway, go ahead. Roy.
Yeah. So and they're really good at what they do, but you know, the kind of community I was long time kind of a part of in this naturalist community that I was part of, we practice bird language. So we would do what we'd call bird sits. We'd all spread out in an area. We would just sit and we would time keep periods and just track observations of what the birds were doing, right?
Cool.
And you would know, we would, you know, also be paying attention to how the birds are communicating, because obviously songbirds are constantly communicating with each other, and they have different you know, calls for alarm, they have different calls for song, different calls for like just communication between each other, and you get to know these patterns, right? And there are very specific patterns for when a Cooper's hawk is coming through or when a sharp-shinned hawk is coming through. And
Wow.
one thing that we would often pick up on is that accipiters love to wake hunt, and so they follow behind something else that is causing a larger disturbance, which is displacing things, and then they'll go in and pick them off while they're
Oh,
displaced.
wow.
And so
Okay.
one example of this that we would see regularly is the garbage truck driving down the road. The Cooper's hawk would just cruise right behind the garbage truck, just cruise with
Whoa.
it, because it knew that songbirds would ditch, you know, away from
Yeah.
this garbage truck barreling down the road, and it would create a ton of noise and a ton of disturbance and disrupt their communication with each other, and it would have an
Mhm.
opportunity.
That's
And
super cool.
it's amazing. This also happened literally, like the prime example of this happening was we had literally just done a bird sit, and we were debriefing the bird sits. We were all sitting down talking and kind of mapping essentially what we were seeing through the different periods. And we're sitting there, and while we're doing this, there's some sparrows, you know, sitting 10 feet away from us, just foraging on the ground, right? And at one point, we started to get like kind of more excited, a little bit more heated, and someone made a big exclamation, and right in that moment, a Cooper's hawk nailed one of those sparrows and
Whoa.
booked it. And it was just sitting there waiting for the opportunity of like distraction, you know, a little bit of a moment, and went right in for the kill. So
That's
I don't know. I think
pretty
about
neat.
like these things are so much more sophisticated than we often realize, you know, and anyway, that's just a little bit of a tangent.
Well,
there.
I think there's, you know, when you think about Cooper's hawks, red tail
Mhm.
hawks, red shoulders, sharpies, you know, those are species that have learned to exploit human
Yeah.
encroachment.
Oh yeah.
I would argue ravens and crows have too. And then there's species that just can't, you
Yep.
know. So it's interesting to see, you know, because if you go out in the wild, you would still see the same observations with your Cooper's hawks waiting for something
Oh
big
yeah.
so they can go and grab something. But
yeah.
they've, I would argue it's probably almost easier for them to live in urban areas because there's so
Mhm.
many more distractions.
Yeah, we were actually, a friend of mine, one of my friends from that same community, we were in Oakland, downtown Oakland on Telegraph, and we were watching a robin in like a big planter box where there were some like live oaks planted, and it was foraging. And we were watching it, and he just asked, he's like, "Do you think this robin has to worry about Cooper's hawks here?" And we were kind of just bullshitting about it, you know, and we both decided, well, yeah, because look at the way that it's acting, you know, just
Right.
it was super vigilant, it was super checked into everything that was going on. And then 10 minutes later, we're walking down Telegraph, and a Cooper's hawk is just cruising down Telegraph with the flow of traffic, and then
Sick.
lands on a light post right in front of us, and we're like, there he is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
They definitely have to worry about Cooper's hawks here.
That's crazy. There have been So I don't know if this is just me being more observant or whatever, but I've been seeing so many fucking bald eagles around where I live.
Interesting.
There's a massive lake nearby, and all I was driving by the lake the other day and I saw a bald eagle there. Never seen him there before. They've been all over near Stanley Lake here in near where I live. And then they've been all over there's like Eagle, Colorado, which is I pass through it all the time when I'm driving to the western slope to go look at collared lizards. There's always eagles there, but it's the reason it's called Eagle, Colorado. Man, I feel like this is like all highly pertinent to keeping animals in captivity too, you know? I mean, like the idea that, you know, man, I hope Cam doesn't get mad at me for going this route. But you know, we had our episode with Camille Hammers that came out recently, and Cam's one of my best friends. He's a great guy. I love Cam to death. I know he never gets mad at me for disagreeing with him, but he and I disagree profoundly, I think, on the concept of like whether or not to hybridize Uromastyx, whether or not to look for morphs and things like this. And I think part of the reason that I disagree with this is because, like, dude, like, it's a sliding scale. Like, on the one hand, we want to, you know, if we're going to glorify the wild type of an animal, that's cool. That's really cool. And there should, like, by all means, I'm glad there are people out there who glorify the wild type of an animal and want to be super, like, locale specific, species specific, you know, you name it. But, like, the second you bring that thing into captivity, we're talking about something totally different, completely different, like a totally different animal, whether it's in its behavior, whether it's in its diet, its microbiota, like it's not even basking under the sun anymore. It's basking under this weird facsimile of the sun, which isn't even close, and it's only for human purpose. Like it's not, no one's ever going to come knocking on my door and be like, hey, ornate Uromastyx are gone from the wild. Like, can you give us a few and we'll just let them go and see what happens? Bullshit, dude. Totally different animal, completely different thing, you know? And I kind of feel like I'm a little bit more intrigued personally. Like, and again, I want to make a distinction here and say that, like, I'm not suggesting this is what anyone else should be considering. I'm not saying this isn't like about right or wrong. This is about my personal thoughts about where I'm going with what I do, which is like, it's way, way, way more interesting to me to think about the animal that I'm putting into this fucking box and making it live in captivity. It's way more interesting for me to think about this animal as something completely different than something that is like a mimic of this wild thing that I really like. You know, like it's far more interesting to think about this as like, I'm changing the context, I'm changing the behavior of the way this thing acts, I'm changing its needs, I'm changing its desires. Within a single generation, we're talking about an animal that is physiologically distinct from its wild counterpart. And yes, in the same way that as being human, some of our health considerations and psychological well-being considerations come from looking into our past and seeing the way we were and using that to inform the way we behave now. All that being said, Roy in California in 2023 is totally different than some hominid living in sub-Saharan Africa 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. It's a different thing altogether. You know, they're related, but they're highly different. And I feel like there's a part of me that thinks on a philosophical level, if we're going to advance in herpetoculture and take herpetoculture to this next level, we have to acknowledge that what we're doing looks very, very different from wild counterparts of the animals that we're keeping. Like it just has to, we can't pretend that we're giving them the same thing. We can't pretend that like the wild type is like the supreme, the dominant, like the end all be all. Like you're not going to convince me that the weird looking ornate that I have in a pen in my shop is the same thing or is less than its wild counterpart living on a rock pile in Israel or Egypt somewhere. You're not going to, I'm sorry, they're not the same thing anymore. We can't judge them by the same standards. And I don't think we can take herpetoculture. I should say this is a lot of this is me spitballing, admittedly slightly intoxicated now. Like, I don't know, but I really feel this. This is something that I think is something I've been thinking about a lot since we started the show. And when I made the intro to this show, I was like 32 episodes. How fucking weird. Every episode we've done, I feel like has been informing my practice and like why I do what I do. And the more convinced I am that the way forward in herpetoculture is not to pretend that we're doing anything. We're doing something completely different, and acknowledging that and moving forward with like, we don't have a wild animal anymore. We're working with a domesticated wildlife. Just deal. It may not be fully domesticated. Yes, we're dealing with wild caught animals. Yes, it's very, very recent. But I think the sooner we say like, okay, we're dealing with stuff that in 50 generations, it's going to be a domestic animal and we're going to think about it in a domesticated fashion. And maybe we're going to have to, like fully actualized food for this thing. And maybe in 50 years, we're going to have one light that tracks over the cage, that tracks the local sun path, and like it's one bulb that emits all the things we need. And whether it's a frog or whether it's a snake or whether it's a lizard or a tortoise or a beetle or whatever, we're dealing with something that is not the same thing as the wild counterpart anymore. I don't know. I just feel like there's this obsession with the wild counterpart that's like informing what we do in a way that maybe isn't as practical as it could be.
No, I think that's a smart way to look, though. I mean, you wouldn't take, I don't know, you wouldn't take a penguin and keep it in a jungle, right?
Yeah.
You have to start
Right.
somewhere. So, and I think you're right, Phil. I think, and this even goes back to my zoo days. I argued with zoo people a lot because a lot of people, and the public feels the same way too. Like, oh, the zoos are saving animals. They're saving them from extinction. And so I'd ask them, I'm like, what animals have zoos actually saved? Like, oh, they can reintroduce animals. What animals have they reintroduced, and has it worked? And there's only a couple, and I don't know if people even know. California condor is one,
Yeah,
but we're still kind of teetering on that, right?
Golden toad stuff.
And then there's some antelope. I can't even think of the name of the antelope, but there's some antelope that they went and captured them all up, and they're reintroducing them. But there's maybe a handful, and it's the research largely supports. This is obviously a tangent, but I think it's kind of intertwined. The research largely supports preserving habitat to save species.
Yeah.
We're not going to put them back. Like when you think about places that are gone, how can you put an animal back in its habitat that's now a parking lot?
Yeah.
Like you can't. So you have to preserve that wildlife, that wild habitat, and everything else will work itself out. I mean, I'm sure you guys like Jurassic Park, right?
Fuck yeah, dude.
So there's something, I mean, right. It's how could you not, right? So the second movie, although it's not great,
No, it's
it's a
great.
I mean, it's good. It's not the first one, and it's not the books. If you haven't read the books, read the books. They're amazing. Anyway, we don't need to go that tangent, but at the end of the second movie, John Hammond says something that I think everyone that's interested in animals or in conservation should really listen to. And it's like, these animals don't need our help to survive. They need our absence.
Yeah.
Like, we need to step back, let them do their thing, and it's going to be okay. And there's research that suggests that is the case.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
and then as you say, Phil, there's a veranda keeper, Frank Reitz in Arizona, and he's been tooting that same horn. He's like, as soon as you take it out of the wild, it is not the same anymore.
It's just
It is
not.
Mhm.
not. And he is arguing. People hate him. He's a little dude, right? I'm not a big guy, but he's even smaller than me. He's like probably 5'1", right? He's a tiny little dude. But he's a cool guy, right? And
Sure.
yeah, his he's been doing reptiles for a really, really long time, right?
Oh yeah.
And some of his methods and practices and the things that he's figured out, people really hate him because, well, he doesn't have real good social skills, but
That's
his
why
his
people disagree with that man. It's not
right,
because of what he keeps and how he keeps it. It's
right,
because he has poor social skills. And
right.
I say that with a great deal of respect for the person, the individual. I have nothing
Agreed.
against Frank, but he's
Agreed. That guy is
very
amazing.
poor at talking about how
Right,
and why he does things and listening to other people and their
right.
perspective.
But when you so for example, when you're breeding your Uromastics, how do you decide what to keep back as future breeders?
It's I just pick I don't I'm it's very important. I'm actually glad you asked me that question because I have no criterion. I don't look for which grows the fastest. I don't look for the most colorful. I don't look for appetite. I just pick whatever's left. I don't care. If it's the nicest one, if it's the one that happens to be the slowest grower, it makes no difference to me because I acknowledge the fact that I am an imperfect and artificial selection mechanism. And I'm
Mhm.
never going to try to pretend that my choices around which animals I keep back have anything to do with the well being of the animals I'm keeping. That's a fallacy. And anyone who pretends like they know exactly what's best for the species based on which animal seems most vigorous to them is full of shit. And I don't mean that I should be, my God, Roy, this might be the most obnoxious episode we've done because
I was worried I was going to be the obnoxious one
no,
actually,
dude,
but
no, no,
This
no,
is
no. And
great. Phil's just got it
okay,
covered for you.
and I
perfect.
should say, uh, what I'm saying now isn't to refute the experience. Like, for example, one of our last episodes, we had Heather Moye on, and she was talking about her bearded dragons. And I'm never going to argue that she doesn't know what to look for in her bearded dragons, right? That's
Mhm.
not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying something very different, which is this, and I think she'd probably agree with me that, like, at the end of the day, if I'm the one making the choices, I'm not Mother Nature. I'm
Mhm.
not Mother Pagona. I don't know what's
Mhm.
best for my bearded dragons, right? I'm making choices that, I've said this before on the show, right? If I have a clutch of 10 Euromastics and I'm going to pretend that the one that hatches 3 days after everything else and is a little smaller than everybody else and maybe takes a little bit while to take off, oh, that's the one that would have gotten eaten in the wild. No, that's bullshit. You have no idea. Roy and I have talked about this before.
Yep.
It could be that the 9 that hatched on Monday, vigorous and healthy, happened to hatch at the wrong time when there's a bird right there by the nest and it takes out all 10 of them. And then 3 days later, the one little runt or whatever the fuck you want to call it hatches out, finds no predators, abundant food, and no competition. And that's the one that survives into and manages to breed for the next generation. You have no idea.
Right.
So I'll be the first to say that we just don't know. You don't. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question in a way that you want it or not, or maybe.
No, that's perfect. No, that's and
Yeah.
that's kind of how I feel too. We artificially select, like with my rodent breeding, I just
Yeah.
pick the
Mhm.
cool ones.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're not interesting, I'm gonna ditch you. And
Mhm.
just through that random selection, like I don't have any goals with my rodent breeding. I just keep the pretty ones I have to look at them, so I might as well keep the pretty ones, right?
Right.
Mhm.
And all these colors and patterns and silky and this and that stuff's just popping up. I'm not selecting for that. It's just popping up
Yeah.
because I kept a pretty mouse back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, what do we know? I actually had this conversation a while ago about king snakes. You'll see oftentimes people tell you, oh, you can't house king snakes together, they'll eat each other.
They're cannibals, don't you know, Chris?
I probably haven't been doing it long enough to know. So I think, and this goes back to what you're talking about, back in the day, you wanted to keep the ones that ate the best and grew the fastest are the ones that you bred, because
Mhm.
that's that's what got to breeding size, you know? And
Right.
so I think people accidentally selected for snakes that wanted to eat everything. You know, there's
Yeah.
established lines of king snakes that you just, it is a real bitch to handle them, if I'm going to be
Mhm.
honest, you know,
Yeah.
because all they want to do is just eat you. That's all they want to do. It's
Yep.
not fun. And you get some of these old school locality guys that, you know, their babies are maybe two, maybe three generations from wild stock,
Yep.
and you can house them together year round, no problem. You know,
Yep.
when you go
Yeah.
out and find king snakes in the wild, you know, I flipped a tarp one day. This just tarp by railroad tracks. Had three adult California kings and three adult gopher snakes. They
Yeah.
weren't trying to eat each other. Nothing was happening. But that was the place to be, you know. But you take some of these established lines of king snakes, and you're going to get one little 3 foot king snake that wants to kill everything, you know. And it's just,
Mhm.
Right.
you know, it's almost like backwards evolution. Like you've created an animal that thrives by itself but can't thrive as a species, you know.
Right.
That's
Well, and
interesting.
that's
Yeah.
okay. And all right. So I should say a few things. First of all, first and foremost, we're we are right at 2 hours. Okay.
I'm good as long as you're not going to be too drunk.
No, well, that's the problem.
I'm teasing. You're good.
I'm getting right into that point where I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude, if I keep drinking, I'm going to be incoherent. Um, I also feel like I should say, um, I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations in ones in which people are openly experimenting in conversation, where it's like, I didn't think about all of this. I mean, this has been floating around in my mind for months on end. I'm the kind of person that thinks out loud. I want to have these, like, that's part of why I'm saying it to you two, is because I
Mhm.
respect what you do and I respect your perspectives, right? If Frank Reedus wanted to come on the show and tell me why I'm full of shit, I'm going to be the first person to hear it. Like, let's talk
Mhm.
about it, right? There are people in this industry who I openly disagree with, people who are far more experienced and accomplished than I am, you know, and I'll go out on a limb and say, you know, people who I deeply respect and I've spoken to on the phone, right? Tom Crutchfield, Tom's the
Mhm.
man. He's been doing it for longer than I've been alive, and I got nothing but respect for the guy.
Mhm.
But I know he and I disagree on stuff. Ron and I disagree on stuff, and Ron is someone who I deeply admire. Philippe, Alan, these are all
Mhm.
people who I deeply admire because they know more than I do, and they've been doing it longer than me. And I know that if I talked with them about the ways that I disagree with them, they'd be the first to have a conversation with me and say, I hear what you're saying, but here's why I think you're wrong. Like,
Mhm.
that's amazing. It's amazing that we are in a time in herpetocultural history where we can have these discussions. There are so many other industries, whether it's through domesticated animals or through scientific pipelines, where people have been having these conversations for centuries.
Mhm.
And in herpetoculture, it's new. We're still trying to figure all of this out. There's so much about what we do that is kind of the Wild West, and it's kind of there's a lot left to be discerned and a lot less left to be systematized and understood and figured out. And I think there's not enough people who are willing to, like, say stupid shit and talk about it later, you know? Like, I don't care. Like, I've made so many mistakes in my life and in different careers and said things that I was wrong about and public. Like, I think Roy and I think in signing up to do this show where we're like, let's do this podcast, we kind of openly committed to, like, the stuff we said on episode 3 or 4, we might not disagree. We might not agree with in 10 years.
Mhm.
When we're at show 100, we might think really, really differently about what we're doing, you know? And I think, I don't know. I just think there's a lot of value in all of this. And
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're coming up against a wall with that idea because herpetoculture really started to take off at the same time that social media really started to take off, right?
yeah, totally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so we've lost, like, what we are having right now has largely been lost through
Yeah.
especially the next generation. Nobody talks on the phone anymore. Nobody writes letters.
Yeah.
Nobody goes and hangs out in person. It's all text, you know, and I have people that I know, and I call them, and they're like, "Why are you calling me?" I want to talk to you,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think we're all at the age where we're kind of at the tail end of the last generation, at the beginning of this next one, and
Mhm.
it's a weird place to be, you know. And so, like you say, you want to have these conversations where you can openly discuss ideas, disagree, agree, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
But social media doesn't really provide you that avenue, because someone makes a state. They say that if you want an answer on social media to post something is blatantly wrong, because
Mhm.
people will jump down to tell you how you're wrong. But if you ask a question,
Mhm.
nobody wants to answer your question, if you're
Yeah.
legitimately interested in something. So you know you have your information on your mastics, but if you get 10 people on Facebook that disagree with you, and they're all buddies, and they're all just going to try to beat you down. I mean, they're not going to beat you down, but there's this echo chamber of, oh, I heard so and so who heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody, and nobody knows what they're talking about.
Right.
These people, we go back to the whole king snakes eat each other thing. You can't house them together. There's people that have never even seen a king snake in person spouting off that information. It's like, well, you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's okay that you don't know. But, maybe instead of saying it like it's, you know, words from the Bible, maybe you just say, hey, I heard this. I
Yeah.
don't
Mhm.
know. And people
Right.
don't take accountability for that. And I think there's a lot of, maybe we can get into psychology and everything, but people have lost a sense of individuality and lost a sense of finding a belonging,
Yeah.
or they've changed how they validate their life and the things that they do.
Very
I'm someone who
true.
I can go out and do yard work. I can feel really good about myself because I raked up leaves. But to
Yeah.
some 20 something, if they don't get 1,000 likes on the little reel they posted, life is over. You
Yeah.
know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like,
Yeah. Sure.
it's a really weird time to live. And like I said, I think this whole advent of social media has really happened at, this catalyst of herpetoculture being widely accepted. When I was a kid, there weren't really reptile pet stores.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a lot of my supplies from Walmart, because
Mhm.
that's where we shopped, and it was cheap. The pet
Yeah.
store that I went to, they didn't have good bedding. So we went to like a Home Depot and would buy orchid bark or potting soil, whatever, because there wasn't that stuff.
Right.
And now it's everywhere. There's, Alan Rapash is a great example. Like, yeah, he bred geckos
Mhm.
like crazy, but now he makes diets. Like, he makes
Yeah.
Yeah.
animal specific diets for very specific creatures. It's not just like, hey, I make dog food. It's like, oh no, I make this wood product to feed millipedes and isopods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Somebody had to be the first person to say, like, I'm gonna take, we normally feed our dogs like meat and vegetables, but I'm
Mhm.
gonna go ahead and make it as weird processed pellet, and like it's a kibble and you can feed it to any dog and they'll be just fine.
right,
Somebody had
Mhm.
to do that. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
I really, you're absolutely right, Chris. Like, all of this really wild discussion and all this totally speculative philosophizing over why and what we do. This has to happen, otherwise what kind of progress is going to get made in these weird Facebook echo chambers around, like, no, you
right,
can't put your bearded dragon on sand, and no, you can't fucking, you gotta house your Euromastics solo, which is what I say all the time. And yet
right.
there's lots of people who do it the other way around. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just feel like, yeah.
You're
Um,
right.
It
And
yeah.
oh,
what kills me is seeing people who have a big social media following. Just, there's somebody that I've met in person. She's a they are. I shouldn't spout gender just to kind of
Mhm.
keep her identity secret. But anyways, there's a person in California who's got a good following on social media. They do reptile presentation type stuff, and they just posted some Euromastics. Like, hey, look at how these cool lizards, and these things look like trash, dude. Like,
Mhm.
just look like trash. It's just like, they eat this and they do this and they do that. Like, well, that's why your lizards look like crap, man. But
Mhm.
people see that
Mhm.
and they think, oh, so and so did this, so this is how it's done.
Mhm.
And I would have to argue, I'm not really good with social media. I mean, you guys definitely do better than I do, but you guys seem like pretty humble people, where you're not like, you're like, hey, look at this cool lizard, not, hey, come bow down to me because I have all this great information and do it just like me. Phil, you take a great approach. You're like, hey, I keep mine alone. Like I keep mine, individually. But then there's the guy, I don't know how many guys in Europe, maybe one guy, he keeps them
No,
in groups and it
several.
works. They works great in groups for them,
Yep.
and that's, then so that brings up just the point of like, hey, just because I do it one way doesn't mean you can't do it another way. But I think people take stuff as gospel, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Phil keeps them individually. They have to be kept individually.
Yeah.
Or, so and so keeps their bearded dragons on carpet because sand gives them impaction. So we can't keep them on sand,
Yeah.
which is weird stuff. And it doesn't make sense. And I think people kind of have lost the ability to think for themselves. I see it all the time, so I'm an admin on a Baron's Racer page. And so Baron's Racers are rear fang venomous, right? And people will go back and forth all day long. Are they dangerous? Is the venom medically significant?
Yeah.
Is it like this? Is it like that? And, invariably you'll get the person that will say, oh, it's like a bee sting. And I have to get on and be like, look, people die from bee stings. So let's not compare, right? And it's like, look, in a lab setting, yeah, not really medically significant, but that doesn't mean it's not going to kill you.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like you shouldn't treat it with respect. Try not to get bit. I mean, they generally don't bite. But along those same lines, I've been deleting posts because I'm an old man in a young man's body, right? And it's like I'll have 50 people ask the same question to post. I'm tired of having to see the same discussion. It's like, guys, like it's on the page. If you would spend 5 seconds and search, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't want to look up for information. Like they don't want to go find out for themselves. There's just a quick fix, like, oh, so and so said this, perfect. I'm just going to do it this way, and not think for myself, not experiment, not listen to my animals.
Right.
Anyway, again, I'm just ranting and rambling here, but
No,
I think it's relevant.
I do too.
Shoot, when we were young, I mean, it was books, right? We talked about the zoo books. There was reptile books.
Yep.
And this is probably, I know you guys asked people about the people that have been influential. Philippe was incredibly influential for me as a kid. I was 12 years old. I bought a book, right? Like Eric Haycraft is who I wanted to be when I was 12 years old, right? The basilisks and the coneheads, right? Yeah, dude. And seeing how his setups are, I can't do that. Like I know for myself, I can't do that. And Phil, when I saw your pictures of Euromastics, I thought, oh, I got to get Euros. Then I saw how you did it. I was like, nope, no.
Nah, you gotta get Euros. You gotta get Euros.
And at some point, I probably will. I probably will transition into doing more lizards, and that's fine. But anyway, so I had this old it's somewhere here. I have this old, water dragons, basilisk, sailfins book, right? This little old black and white book that Philippe wrote, right? This little nothing to do book. And those are the books I could afford. Right? I could go, break a yard for a couple bucks or whatever. Anyway, so in the back of the book, there was an address. I was like, I'm going to write this guy a letter. So I wrote him a letter. Hey, you don't know who I am. I read your book. I love your book. I really want a basilisk, blah, blah, blah. Philippe actually wrote me back. Somewhere I've got the letter, but I'm 12 years old. My penmanship was terrible. It's still terrible, but he took the time to write me back and say, hey, thanks for reading my book. Water dragons are probably going to be a better option for you than basilisks because of ABCD. It was incredible. Like, holy crap. But nowadays, who's going to do that? No one's going to reach out like that. Nobody does. It's a weird thing. So I don't know.
It's true. It's uncommon.
It's just such a weird thing. Anyway, it's just different times, man. It's just very different times. We grew up having to look for stuff, and now everything is at people's fingertips, and they don't know how to look for things anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, I mean, I feel like what we say is like rambling is actually really pertinent information. There's all this stuff that a lot of us who've been doing this for a long time have in the back of our minds, and we think of it as this sort of tangential stuff, but it's actually stuff that's kind of on the forefront of what we should be thinking of. I have to pee so bad, so I'm gonna pee really quick.
Go for it. Yeah.
I also think we should turn this towards the close of the convo because there's no way and I don't mean, I should say, Chris, part of the reason I had alcohol during this episode, and I've had a little bit of alcohol during other episodes, is because like it helps me loosen up, and I don't feel like I'm trying to have like this orchestrated conversation, one
Sure.
that's curated. I want to have one that's more relaxed, one that resembles more of the kind of convos that would happen at the bar after a show. And it's obvious that we need to have you on for more than one episode. Like,
Oh, I'm super stoked about that. That'd be great.
it's obvious.
Yeah, we gotta do it.
So I'm gonna hit the head really quick. It's gonna just take me a second, and if we could turn this towards the close of the convo, I think that'd be perfect. Also, because I gotta have dinner with my fiance here shortly. So as long as that's okay with you guys.
That's great,
Good?
man. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll be right back. Keep going.
All right, Roy, you got a question for me?
Oh man.
I
Well,
know, on the spot, right?
I mean, there's a bunch of them. I actually made a
Well,
whole bunch of
let's
questions
try
for
to
you.
shotgun through them here.
But I want to hear a little bit about your beadeds, your beaded lizards.
Sure, sure,
How long have you been keeping them? What's the story there? Yeah,
sure.
let's hear it.
So, beadeds are freaking awesome, and if
I
the
really want
listeners are
one.
in areas, what's that?
I really want
You want
one.
one? You should get one. Yeah, if people live in an area where you can have a beaded lizard, um, as long as you're in the dummy, people don't be stupid with your animals, but beadeds are awesome, man. They're super, super
Yeah,
cool. It's almost like if you took a monitor and combined it with a snake,
yeah.
which I know seems really weird. They don't have the metabolism like a monitor lizard, but care is relatively similar, right? They like it
Hmm.
warm. I don't give mine too much humidity. I mean, they're honestly, I keep them a lot like a snake, to be
Hmm.
perfectly frank with you. I got my first beadeds. Oh man, it's probably been 15 years ago now. I got a couple beadeds from Bob Applegate, kept them. It was
Nice.
great. Ended up having to move those on to somebody else, just with life and the way things go. Hadn't really kept beaded since, and just a few years ago, a friend of mine was selling a proven female, and beadeds are notoriously difficult to sex, right? They're People will
Yeah.
tell you to your face, "Hey, oh, this is a male, this is a female." You can't, right? You just can't. And
Hmm.
anybody who wants a beaded, if they go to somebody and they say, "Hey, this baby's a female or this baby's a male," they're lying to you. You can't
Hmm.
tell, right? There's trends, there's things you can kind of look for, but you just can't tell. So if you want beadeds, get them, and hopefully you and get good ratios. But anyway, so I picked up this female because she'd laid eggs. I knew it was a female. A local guy here had what he thought was a pair. Um, Me looking at him, I was pretty sure it was two boys. And I
Hmm.
know that's like I just contradicted myself saying you can't
Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
at them, but it just felt like two males. It ended up being two males, but we bred that female with both males, which is good. She laid eggs. Uh, Incubation takes forever, like
Mm.
forever. I think the eggs were laid July and they hatched the following March.
Wow.
So quite a long time. Now, I will say that I didn't put them in an incubator. I kind of let them kind of room incubate, which is how I do most of my stuff. My
Hmm.
room stays right in like a sweet spot of just warm enough, but not cold. So
Hmm.
they develop slower, but generally, like my baby snakes hatch out larger, more vigorous. And it works better for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fewer things can go wrong when you're not worrying about an incubator. Like you can't cook the eggs that way.
Right.
Anyway, so they hatched out, and that was awesome. That was amazing, super cool. And I ended up, all right, well, I need to get my own male. Someone said, "Hey, this guy's got a pair and maybe two males." The price was right. It was really, really inexpensive. So, yeah, I'll take them. And I got them. And again, it was like, these are girls, man. And sure
Mm.
enough, it ended up being two more girls, which I'm not going to complain about, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, uh, and then I did find a male for them. And um, so last year, I kind of experimented, kind of cohabbing, trying to keep females together. I witnessed breeding action with all three females. Um, And I thought, okay, great. A female's going to go lay eggs and it'll be good. I learned the hard way that you got to separate, at least for me. I don't know. Maybe some people do it
Hmm.
differently. A lot of this is largely on my own trial and error, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was keeping them together, and just the fact that there was more than one female, and I mean, there's a large enclosure. It was too stressful for them to just sit and lay their eggs all at one shot.
Mm.
So I kind of get a couple eggs here, a couple eggs there out of each girl, whatever. It was very inconsistent. I did
Hmm.
get some good fertile eggs. I had a lot of good eggs that got punctured by other females, so they went bad, obviously because they have holes in them. But yeah, so I have eggs cooking from last year that hopefully in the next month or so
Nice.
will start hatching. But it's super easy. They eat birds and rodents in the wild. So you
Yeah,
can feed them
totally.
chicks and quail. You can do eggs as a treat. You don't want to give them eggs too often because they get addicted to the eggs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and yeah, so they're super easy. Feed them once a week, maybe twice a week. And I brumate them just like I brumate my colubrids, just cool them down for a few months, wake them back up. Um, and I haven't experienced this personally, but I've heard that you can't stud out a male to more than maybe two girls. It's kind of like it.
Mm,
Oh,
I guess that 1 to 1, 1 to 2 is kind of like ideal. So I'm going to give one of my girls the year off this year and really try to my two larger females, see if I can get some good clutches out of them. But generally speaking, they're super easy. They're going to give you a heart attack at some point because
mm.
you're going to pull open a tub or look in an enclosure and it's going to be
Be sleeping
upside
on their
down
back.
sleeping. And
Yeah.
it still gets me, dude. It really does. Um, it's hilarious because they're just
Hmm.
lounging out, but it's like, did it die? And
Yeah, of
of course
course.
not. It's just sleeping on its back. And, we've speculated as to why they do that. Being an animal that lives in the burrow,
Hmm.
they're just going to roll around and do whatever they want to do down in their burrow. And
homicide too.
doesn't seem to change too much when they're not in a burrow.
Hmm.
That being said, um, early on, I found that they would just dig incessantly.
Hmm.
Hit a corner of an enclosure or a tub and just dig, dig, dig. And so I found adding some kind of nest box or hide box that was slightly humid, even if it was just dirt, not even damp dirt, but just dirt, um, really prevented that. It alleviated a lot of that wandering behavior, that clawing behavior. So I don't know, just little things you kind of pick up along the way. But if you can keep and breed a corn snake or a king snake, you can keep and breed a beaded lizard. It's super easy.
Very
So
cool.
apart from the venomous stuff, you're not going to die probably, but you'll be in a world of hurt. I know one
Yeah.
person personally who got bit by a baby beaded, and he was laid up for a couple of days just writhing in pain. It just
Yeah.
he's vomiting and diarrheal and all kinds of crap, but
Oof.
nothing too crazy beyond that. So anyway, and the babies are usually the ones that are going to get you because the babies are super defensive and
Right.
it's like working with crocodilians. Crocodilian babies can whip around really easily and grab the end of their tail or their hips. The larger they get, the slower they get. And honestly, the adults will just bump you with their face. They won't even try to bite. But
Hmm.
of course, they are venomous. So be careful with them. I always pick mine up with a hook up front, put them on a hook under their armpits and grab their tail. I don't
Hmm.
have to, but I do. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
better safe than sorry. So
Good protocol.
anyway, my smallest female is like a puppy dog, man. Like you
Hmm.
can just reach in, pick her up. Still though, I use a hook and but
Hmm.
I'll just hold her without a hook because she's generally pretty good. So
That's
Huh.
awesome.
That's fascinating.
yeah.
Really rad. I've never messed too much with I'm super paranoid around venomous stuff just because I'm like I've been bitten by my stupid Egyptian. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like
Right.
he's not pork chop's not fast. And if I've been
Yeah.
bitten by that thing, I'm gonna get bitten by like a hognose snake or anything even remotely faster than that.
Right. I
But
would argue that a beaded lizard is probably a little slower than pork chop and
yeah,
Hmm.
probably and also like I said the adults, man, they're all we say they're huff and puff, right? They
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
exhale quickly and they try to fake you out. They flinch real hard just to get you to back off. And just like anything else, if you don't push it, they're not going to go beyond that kind of display.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
So anyway, because my male's a dick.
yeah.
He's a jerk, man, and he's big and he's really impressive. And it's like I flinch every time I go in to do anything with him because he just every time,
I
Yeah. I
bet.
know.
So whatever, it is what it is. I'm not. It's not going to embarrass me if people think I'm a pussy because then come pick him up. Come see
Yeah,
him.
whatever. Whatever, man. Anybody who tries to like use what reptiles they'll handle as like a pissing contest is
Right,
Yeah.
playing
right.
the wrong game.
Seriously.
Agreed.
Seriously. Well
Yeah,
said.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Well, Phil, do you wanna offer our closeout question? And we're just
no,
gonna
I
have to
think
have
you
you
do.
back.
Yeah, we got to have you back, Chris, because I know that there's a story of you getting bitten and some other things we got to talk about. And I know you have more to talk about other than just the sort of like drunken philosophical crap that I tried to rage on in this conversation.
I
But
would say that you succeeded, man. This was awesome.
hey, shit, that's great. I'm so glad you think so. Hooray!
I,
Maybe I
I
need.
I just thought you were, if I didn't know you were drinking whiskey, I wouldn't know. I would just think that you were super into it and having a good time. So
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, I am in fact super into it. It just so happens that the whiskey kind of loosens me up
Whiskey
and makes it so I don't.
facilitated it a little bit.
I
sure.
yeah, I don't fear consequences much when I've drank a few
There you go.
alcoholic beverages. But I actually think Roy, I think you might be the man to ask the closing question if that's cool with you.
Of course, yeah. Well,
Yeah, you
you've
are in
you've
fact the
listened to
man.
our show, I know, and
Yep.
yeah. So the closing questions: why herpetoculture? And we always say that you can take that as broadly or as narrowly as you wish. Whether that's, why do you do it, or why do we do it? Why does it matter?
Sure.
Why
Sure. Yeah. And
herpetoculture?
honestly, since we kind of talked about having me on the show, that's obviously been on my mind. Of course,
Mhm.
90% of what I thought I would talk about, we haven't even touched, which is awesome,
Of course.
actually, because that just
Yeah.
means it's really, really good because I didn't prep it. But,
Yeah.
obviously you've had some really good guests on that have talked, and I could echo a lot of them. There's, was it Phil Tremper? Was it Ron Tremper? Who was
Mhm.
it? Phil
Phil
Tremper and
Tremper. Yep.
addiction. I mean,
Yep.
for sure,
Or
right?
disease. Yeah.
And, um, I almost think why not?
Yeah.
Why
Mhm.
not? But I think what it comes down to, I think we all herp keepers probably feel the same way, at least in part to every response you got to that answer. I think everyone can kind of align themselves with, at least in part. Um, One thing that I've thought about this for a long time before even your podcast came around. It's why do I like what I like? Why
Mhm.
reptiles? Oh yeah, well, they like dinosaurs, like, but they're not dinosaurs. We all know they're not dinosaurs. And obviously, insects, arachnids, mammals, birds. I like animals. I like nature. But why have
Mhm.
I dedicated myself, at least in part, to reptiles and amphibians, right? And this and I don't know if this really is to my core, but definitely it's part of it. But loving the unloved. Um,
Mhm.
it nothing infuriates me more than me talking to somebody and like, oh, you keep a lot of snakes. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I like snakes, reptiles. Like, oh yeah, I killed a rattlesnake. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't understand, man. And I know what
Yeah.
they're trying to do is connect with me, but when I hear that, I get filled with so much rage. And it's like, guys,
Mhm.
we have this amazing species. Like, rattlesnakes are so unique and so evolved and so special.
So
And
amazing.
at one point was the national animal,
Yeah.
and your response is to go kill it. I don't understand. So for me, I think it's loving the unloved, and
Mhm.
at least in part, there's of course a financial aspect. If I wasn't trying to make money, I'm not going to,
Mhm.
hide behind any bushes, like trying to make some money. Why not?
Mhm.
Capitalism is great if you're on
Yeah.
the winning side. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Imagine
we don't need to get into all the politics of that. But if I even if money wasn't a factor, I would still, if I wasn't trying to make a more legitimate business, I would still keep reptiles because I love them. And
Mhm.
yeah.
I think there's something to be said about just, it's just a love. I mean, more than a passion, I think it's a deep rooted love. And I think maybe from being bullied and picked on as a kid, feeling different, feeling outcast, it's like, well, these kind of animals are kind of that same way too.
Yeah.
Rattlesnakes
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
particular in the U.S., and you get, stuff in other places that are, kind of demonized. But and it's a weird shift because 1,000 years ago, snakes were idolized.
Yeah.
Almost godlike. They can shed their skin and renew. But there's been this shift, and it's like, why don't we love these animals anymore? They're so important and they're so amazing. And is that why I breed them? I don't know. I don't know if
Mhm.
I have a really good answer apart from, I can just echo everybody else. Like, every answer that has been given is a good answer. And I can definitely say, yeah, that's part of why I do what I do. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that really facilitates the bill. It's almost like a cop out, I feel, but it really like,
No, no.
I mean, I am addicted. It is a disease and I love it and I don't know what I would do without it.
Mhm.
And I don't know. Maybe that is all there is that needs to be said, but um it's fascinating. I learn about myself, like I said, and I know maybe keeping the birds at the zoo help me deal with people, but I think reptiles, keeping an animal that cannot communicate with you in the way that you naturally communicate helps you
Mm.
be a better person.
Oh
So,
man,
That's really well said.
that's
Yeah.
the shit. That was a great answer, dude.
so let's go with that. You can cut everything else out. We'll just go with that.
No, we'll keep it all in there.
Um, you've got, your mastics. I mean, how many facial expressions do they give you? They don't.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
don't, but you kind of know how they feel. And so when you get a mammal, these big hairless monkeys running around
Mhm.
and they give you 1,000 different expressions,
Yeah.
you can communicate really, really well. So I think, like I said, I think maybe keeping reptiles helps me be a better person and helps me be, more involved and deal with people better. So
Mhm.
No, I
I
love
don't know.
that.
There you go.
I love that, man. That's a fantastic answer. Excuse me.
There are a few better communicators than rattlesnakes.
That's true. It's no bullshit. One thing.
They let you know.
Yeah. That's great, man.
Really
That's a
appreciate
wonderful.
it, Chris.
Chris,
Yeah,
thank you.
guys, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for
Yeah.
coming on
I
the
look
show.
forward
Thanks
to the
for
next
taking
one,
the
man.
time.
Oh, it's been lots of fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, hell yeah. Before
Where
you
can
go, I
folks
know.
find you?
Yeah.
Oh, well, like I said, I'm terrible with social media, but I do have Instagram and a Facebook page, Sharpshooter Reptiles, just all one word. I'm tempted to do a TikTok for it as well, but I have no idea how that works.
You should.
Um, I guess if I do figure it out, it'll be the same handle, Sharpshooter Reptiles. But yeah, I'm trying to be more proactive about putting stuff out there and figuring out the algorithms that work. But yeah, you can hit me up and tell me to post more. Maybe I will. So
Sounds
All
good.
right.
there you
I'll
go.
have it in the show notes, man.
Yeah, hell
Perfect.
yeah.
Any
Roy,
last tags, Phil?
uh, the obstacle is the way. Um, uh, discipline equals freedom. Uh, uh, Herpetoculture is the move. Get better, contribute, help us all do better at what we're doing and legitimize what we do so that way we don't get legislated out of existence. And everyone's great. And I appreciate everyone's poise and grace in letting me verbally vomit and say a bunch of shit because this is how I do my cognitive processing is out loud and verbally. And it's nice to be able to do it in the company of interesting, dedicated, compassionate people. So Roy, Chris, thank you for doing what you do. And thanks for being cool.
Oh,
Thanks for the
thanks for you doing what you do, man.
thanks for the fun convo.
Thanks,
Yeah, no,
gentlemen.
I just drank a bunch of whiskey. Anyway, Roy, you want to hit that and
Yep.
record
Okay,
button?
here comes the button. Here comes the button. 3, 2, 1.